Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this beautiful venue where hopefully, as of 30 seconds ago, everything seems to be working. So let's hope it stays like that. My name is Matthew Roche. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ID5. It's a real pleasure to see you here today. ID5 is 7 years old this year, and it feels like, at least for the past 4 years, we've lived a bit of a Groundhog Day situation with the industry asking itself every morning if and when Google was going to deprecate third-party cookies. So today we're going to try to break away from Groundhog Day, and we're going to look forward, look at the future. So we've got a great agenda to share with you, great speakers. We're going to start, if the screens behind me works, we're going to start by sharing, and the clicker. Oh, no, too much. Okay, I'm staying here. I'm not moving. I'm going to try. So we're going to start by sharing some of the results of the annual study that we run. Every year, ID5 releases the State of Digital Identity, which is a way for us to take a pulse on the market. This session was particularly interesting because it ran in July, so between July and August. So obviously something happened in July, as you all know, and it was interesting to see the reaction of the market. So we'll have that. We'll have a discussion about TV, because identity is not just about cookies. It's much broader than that. So we'll have a great panel talking about CTVs and the opportunities, the challenges, but also the opportunities around identity, user recognition, targeting, frequency capping in that space. We're going to talk about publishers and how a lot of them have moved forward and haven't looked back and have embraced new ways to monetize, new ways to surface their audiences to buyers. So we're going to talk about that with some great publishers. We're going to talk about brands and agencies and how the changes are affecting them and how they think about not just identity, but also AI, also cross-channel behaviors and all those things. And we're going to finish with a really fun panel, I'm sure, talking about the future post-Google dominance. As you know, Google has been under massive scrutiny from the DOJ, from the European Union, the CMA. And so we're going to do a bit of projection, a bit of science fiction, to think about what the world will look like after a breakup or a divestiture, whatever it is, of the Google ad tech stack. So that's the agenda we have for you this afternoon. I'm really excited to share that with you all. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Valbona to come up and tell us about the state of digital identity. Thank you very much for being here. Welcome to ID5 on the road. Valbona?
Thank you. All right, and I'm going to stay on this side. All right, as Matt anticipated in this presentation, yes, we're going to talk about we're going to try to paint a picture on the state of identity today. But to do that, we're going to go through some of the key results of the State of Digital Identity report. I know that it's a famous report, but maybe not all of you are familiar with it. So I'm going to give you some context before we jump in. Every year at ID5, we run a survey to measure the pulse of the industry on topics such as the industry's preparation for a world without conventional signals, the adoption and the satisfaction rates with identity solutions, as well as identity challenges in adult channels, such as CTV, for example. So we launched this year's survey in July, and as Matt anticipated earlier, something happened in July. Google decided that we were no longer deprecating cookies, and instead they would introduce a new interface that enables users to opt in or opt out from cookies. So we couldn't help but include some questions on the topic. So let's jump in. Sorry, this is not really working very well. Okay, I want to start with this slide. So we collected data from July to August, managed to collect responses from 202 participants by promoting the survey using our database, social media platforms, as well as media partnerships. If we look at the audience, that should show in a second, hopefully. Let's see. So the first audience breakdown, we can see the industry representatives that took this survey from different regions, with EMEA, as you can see, being the largest segment. In this next one, you'll see the audience breakdown when it comes to company type. So we had representatives from all across the industry, with data platforms and technology platforms being the largest cohort. But let's jump in. The first question that we asked our audience was, what was the reason behind Google's decision to push back on cookie deprecation? And the majority of the audience said that this was due to poor privacy sandbox results, as well as the ongoing investigation that Google was going through with the CMA. Very few people thought that Google decided to do this because they wanted to give people the options to choose, or because they listened to the industry's feedback. And by the way, when people had to select the options here, they could select all the options that applied. This is why the numbers don't sum up to 100. The next question that we asked was, what is the opt-out rate going to be for this new user interface? If you remember, when the news broke on this new user interface, some experts predicted that the opt-out rate was going to be similar to what we see today in ATT. And what we see today in ATT is that the opt-out rate is approximately 50%. That obviously changes according to verticals and regions, but 50% is the benchmark. So if you can see here, majority of our audience believes that the opt-out rate is actually going to be higher. But if we calculate the average, the weighted average, taking into account all the responses that we got, the number that we get is 55%. So pretty much aligned with the industry's experts' predictions. But the biggest question that we wanted to answer is, will this change from Google have an impact on the way the industry transitions to alternative identity solutions and to next generation addressability? And the answer seems to be no, because 73% of the audience said that their plans to transition won't be derailed by Google's decision. And actually, 76% of them said that they have already adopted one or more solutions, with 15% saying that they are still planning to adopt one or more in the next few months. Adoption rates seem to be quite high, especially on the tech side and the publisher side, but they're lower on the advertiser side. So to understand the reason behind this, we can have a look at another questions that we included in the survey. We asked advertisers whose role is to solve for identity challenges. And the majority of our audience, 60% of advertisers, said that it's tech platforms' job, meaning that advertisers expect their tech platforms to select the solutions that will support their use cases in a world without conventional signals. And this is why the adoption rates are not as high as in other cohorts. Hopefully. All right, so one of the alternative solutions that the industry has to address cookieless audiences is the privacy sandbox. But we wanted to understand how people are feeling about the privacy sandbox. Are they testing it? Are they happy with the results? And it looks like very few people have tested it. 36% of our audience said that they have tested it, with an additional 22% saying that they are considering. And if we look at the test results, you can see that the majority of the audience, 87%, said that they are actually disappointed or very disappointed with the test results that they measured. But luckily, there are other identity solutions provided by independent players. And if we look at the test rates and satisfaction rates, the picture is totally different. 53% of the audience said that they've already tested one or more solutions, with an additional 34% saying that they're either waiting for test results or still planning to run tests. Satisfaction rates are also considerably better, with 75% of the audience saying that they're either satisfied or very satisfied with the results that they measured. All right. Within alternative identity solutions, independent ones, there is also a variety of options. So we asked our audience which ones they are adopting to solve for addressability challenges. When responding to this question, they also had the option to select all the solutions that they were using. And the answer that we got here is that universal identifiers seem to be the most adopted solution to address cookieless challenges, with PMPs and DLIDs with first-party data coming second. Oh, okay, but what are the criteria that people use when adopting a solution? What are the most important things to look at when you select a partner? According to our audience, transparency in data usage and methods for acquiring and processing signals seems to be the main criteria, showing that companies that prioritize these two areas will probably have higher adoption rates and success rates with their platforms. But we know that identity is not just a web challenge. It actually affects many more, sorry. It actually affects all the other advertising channels that we have. So we asked our audience which one is the channel that needs better addressability more urgently. And more than 50% of the audience said that that channel is CTV, with mobile and in-app coming second. So these responses are not very surprising. If we think of mobile, the channel is also using its key identification signal, the mobile ID. And if we think about CTV is attracting quite a lot of budgets, is growing fast, but the lack of a common addressability system really prevents publishers and advertisers from unlocking the full value that CTV can offer. But we'll have a full panel dedicated to CTV right after this one. So before we move on to that discussion, I just wanted to share some final numbers on CTV that we were able to measure. If I can get to the last slide. All right, this is the one. So what are the biggest challenges in CTV? It looks like privacy is one of them, because 70% of our audience believes that CTV doesn't provide users with transparency and control over their data. And this number is actually up 20% from last year, showing that people are getting more concerned and more aware of the challenges of CTV and probably more keen to address them. And the second challenge is about the inability to support some of the key use cases of CTV. And it looks like, according to our audience, measurement is the most urgent one that needs to be addressed. So these are just some of the results that we have in the report. We have many more, so I would highly invite you to go to our website, download it from our resources page, but we'll also make sure that we send it to you as a follow-up to this event. So thank you very much for being here, and let's go to the next panel. Before we go, let me move this. Yeah.
I think that's going to be a running joke for the rest of the afternoon. Right, we talked a lot about CTV, which is probably unusual in an identity discussion, but I think it's really interesting to look at it as an advertising problem, more so than a cookie problem or an IDFA problem, because when you think about it, what matters for advertisers in digital is the ability to reach their audience, the ability to measure and optimize the frequency of exposure, the ability to measure the performance of their investment. All of that relies on a really good understanding of who the devices and the users behind the devices are when they run campaigns. And thank you. And the methods that have been prevalent on the web has been cookies. On mobile apps, it's been IDFAs and mobile ad IDs. In TV, there is a variety of solutions. A lot of people use IP addresses. Some platforms pass their own device ID. You can think of a Roku ID. You can think of a LG, WebOS, whatever the name was. So there's different versions, but there is a massive lack of consistency. There's a massive lack of cross-platform connectivity. I think we've all seen multiple times the same ad over several ad slots in a row, right? Frequency capping is very difficult. Measurement, outcome measurement, bridging out from TV to another screen where a conversion might happen. All of those things are real challenges that are still getting in the way of what is already a very fast-growing medium, but that could be even faster growing. So all of that to tee up the discussion. We have a great set of experts, so I'm just going to leave the stage to them. JB, if you want to come and introduce them, to talk about how to build a better addressability system for CTV.
Super. Thank you very much, Mature. Lovely to see everybody today. And yes, we have a panel of experts. If my experts would please take the stage and let's sit underneath our own faces, because I know some people do get upset about that. So interesting that research showed that CTV is considered the marketing channel that needs a better addressability system the most. So that's our challenge to discuss on the panel today. Let's do a quick round of introductions. I mean, it does say on the wall behind you, but what you do maybe. Starting with you, Thomas.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for Freewill outside the US. Should we say?
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Kleinschmidt. I am the VP of Sales for Xperi, or TiVo, which is a new smart TV operating system rolling out across Europe. I will say that I've been selling CTV for about 9 years, with experience both in the US and in Europe for the last 6 years. So,
yeah. What was your previous job?
So before joining Xperi, I just joined there about 6 months ago. Before Xperi, I was actually part of the Samsung ads business for about 8 years. Again, starting in New York City, helping to launch that business, and then moving over to Europe to help launch the European business.
Hi, everyone. I'm hoping my voice is going to last for the rest of this panel. My name is Moana Beals, and I'm the VP of Publisher Development at ID5, working very closely with our premium Tier 1 publishers across display and CTV.
So publishers includes broadcasters?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Alex Ong. I lead business development for Magnite across their streaming business, so OTT, CTV, bringing on media owners, publishers, broadcasters, all of the above.
So, challenge for the audience. We've got an international panel of experts. You have to guess which one of them doesn't live in England. Meanwhile, so we saw that the addressability issue is a big concern in connected TV specifically. So let me ask each of you, I'm going to start with you, Chris. What does a more robust addressability system for connected television look like? And how does that differ from what we have today?
I think the easiest way to answer this, in my opinion, is a more robust CTV ecosystem is literally having parity and equal standards across the entire platform, for like publishers, buyers, the whole ecosystem. It's so fragmented, and I think this will be the theme we're going to hammer on for the next 30 minutes. But linear TV literally has one source of truth for buying and selling linear TV ads, and that's accepted. CTV is anything but that, and that just causes more and more confusion for everyone that kind of plays into the space.
Alex?
Yeah, definitely agree with Chris there. I think it's about simplifying it and making sure that there's a standardization to plan, buy, sell, and report and measure against it. I think that's what what we're hearing the agencies want, is looking for that single source of access or making it easy for them to access it, but also making sure that we can communicate that with the supply side so everyone's kind of in agreement of where this should all be going.
Thomas, would you agree, disagree? Anything you would add?
I mean, I've spoken many times about sort of the simplicity of it. Has to be simpler. I think, we're also talking about how, fragmentation has led, to confusion. What we're seeing sort of more and more right now is the traditional publishers and their effort in streaming and CTV. The struggle is to attract new buyers to that platform, and across the simplicity factor, how do we make CTV easier to buy? How do we make it scalable? Because people that were born, or publishers that were born out of CTV, and one big one who's only done that, they've made that simple, they've made that unified, and so for at least the publishers that we deal with at Freewill, they have to try and attract new buyers that sort of didn't come from TV, and so that's the biggest problem. And CTV has to do, or publishers that want to win in CTV have to do a better job at attracting these new buyers. Okay, and then Morwenna, final words from you on what does a more robust addressability system for CTV look like, and how does that differ from what we have today?
Well, I think that's an important point to start with, right? I think we need to look at what we have got today in order to determine what we need in the future. Obviously, we've seen huge growth across CTV. We've seen the new platforms, new devices hitting the market, which has caused huge fragmentation. We see primary growth coming from AVOD and FAST channels, and obviously those advertising budgets have followed those trend lines. But I think those advertising budgets are expecting the same level of precision afforded to them that they've seen across desktop display, and that's the ability to target and to measure. And the current mechanisms, i.e. household IP and deterministic device ID, do not, they offer low fidelity and low long-term stability. And so it's really critical that the CTV marketplace embrace new mechanisms in terms of addressability to ensure that we can continue to see measurement and targeting within CTV and embrace a privacy-first solution for the players out there.
Okay, so we'll come back to some of those points that you hit on, measurement, targeting, privacy, but since you also talked about buyers there, and you did too, Thomas, making it easy for buyers. Alex, you were first to raise buyers. So tell me, when you're talking to buyers, do you actually speak to agencies and brands yourself directly?
Not me directly.
But your team.
We have teams, right?
Okay,
for sure.
So what do the buyers ask for your teams, agencies and brands directly? What do they ask for when it comes to connected television in terms of addressability and also in terms of identity?
So it really, I think there's a progression in it. So from a day-to-day campaign perspective, they're looking at, are we getting the IPs? Are we getting device IDs, user agents, all of that, but also the content metadata. That's what they're looking for in that bid stream. Then they're looking at, okay, then how do we look at unified audiences or looking at omni-channel activation? So that's where the really SPO side for the agencies are really coming in, and that's where they'll come to us and want to work with us to be a single tech platform for them to be able to consolidate all of that inventory so they can make it easy for themselves to buy and sell that within their brands and brands at the agencies.
So because you're saying omni-channel because you have so many different options from display, mobile, video. Okay, Chris?
Yeah,
Are you talking to agencies directly?
We are, in the current role and in my previous role. So I've heard a lot of this feedback firsthand. But I mean, it's funny because Alex, you kind of mentioned that, about transparency, the content signals that are being sent or not sent more appropriately. I still go back to this often example where, again, you're talking to different teams that have different KPIs. Even though, and again, this is nothing new, of course, but anybody who's kind of been selling CTV knows that budgets are coming from digital teams, they're coming from linear teams, they're coming from hybrid teams. I cannot tell you how many times we might be talking to a digital team that has an objective to go by incremental reach for a linear TV campaign. Sounds great, right? You can do that with different types of data sets that sit out there, usually proprietary. But then you're kind of comparing that result to a linear team that's buying GRPs. Yeah. And the digital team is not even talking about demographic targeting. So it's like there's a huge disconnect within the agencies and budgets themselves. And everybody's just kind of spinning in circles around what they think is the right target audience. And I actually don't think buyers have figured out what they really want. I think they're just chasing metrics and trying to find an easy way to spend budgets, because that, quite frankly, is one of the challenges that the agencies have, is just resources. So I see a lot of issues on the buy side of kind of what they want is often just very much aligned with what they're kind of tasked with, depending on their individual team. But I don't see a cohesive strategy for brands.
Much more tactical.
Yeah.
And Thomas, you mentioned specifically, I think you're talking about making it easier to buy for more than just the top 200 buyers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big challenge. And I just want to sort of bounce back on what Chris was just saying, because if you speak to, publishers who have a very strong linear business today, and specifically in this country, there's 20 sort of barb segments, and that's relatively straightforward. But when you talk to the same people, and I know you speak to a lot of them regularly as well, Joe, is what does that translate to in a CTV world? Are we saying we should match these particular segments, or should we consider, the 250,000 auto intenders in the Greater Manchester region, right? Because we're going to have that ability. Yes, sure, if we solve some of this, but that becomes available, and therefore does that model become better? Because again, those publishers that have that have been CTV native and that have built their entire business thinking about a CTV world first, they're thinking that. And so anybody who's transitioning, because that's mostly who we deal with right now, is how do I convert this one type of audience or these various segments into, again, different hybrid teams who are buying linear, they're buying CTV, they're buying both. And that's complex, right, for them. And so, again, attracting these new buyers will mean figure that out. Do you want to buy them just on, data, context, or do you want to replicate what a bar segment looks like, in ABC1 on CTV? You're going to have to figure that out.
So what's the answer? They're figuring it out. What would you advise them?
I think so before you answer that, you say there's also a big problem right now, which is, I don't want to say CTV fatigue, right? That's not, but there are definitely a lot of inventory who have sort of flooded the market in a way without necessarily the right attributes to be valuable. And so what is extremely valuable, somebody that's logged in or somebody that is identified in a particular region with a data set, that's extremely valuable. If you have none of that and yet you have, billions upon billions of unidentified, unvaluable impressions, that needs to be solved first. Once you do that, so once you create that right environment, you do need to be able to identify those users across these platforms, which I think 37% said that is the main thing. Because again, they are used to budgets on YouTube, they're used to budget on Meta, and they have a lot of that, right? All of that exists. Now it's tonnage, but it exists, right? And so that's the biggest thing.
Tonnage backed with data.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we need a better. Well, just like the survey says, we need a better way to identify users, and then brands can bring their own data, or the broadcasters can add their data. Broadcasters, publishers. It's interesting what you said, Chris, because I've experienced that myself, where, especially in the early days of connected TV, weren't really sure, is this innovation budget, is it TV, is it AV? And I'm surprised to hear it's still going on with lots of different teams. But it's also fragmented when it comes to devices and options. There are walled gardens to consider. How can we address the issues around fragmentation that ultimately mean it's hard to target and it's hard to cap, it's hard to frequency cap?
I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to identity, right? At the end of the day, kind of like the sum of all of this, it's not going to happen until everybody's doing it, right? It has to be ubiquitous for it to be a standard. It goes back, though, again, I think to the question you asked just before, so not trying to be a politician here, but going back to like what do buyers want? I've been saying this for years, and obviously I'm an idiot, so nobody listens to me. But literally, just look at the proportionate time spent. How much time do people spend watching some sort of video? And if we know 5% spent in AVOD, right, and that can be defined however the agency wants to define it, put 5% of your budget there, right? Figure out who the right players are in that space to give you the reach across that proportionate time spent. Carve out your budgets, have one team that has common objectives. And quite frankly, if you're a buyer, literally go to the publishers and say, I will not run with you unless you accept duh, right? Whatever that duh is, right? Find out what their solution is to address and identify specific audiences and force publishers to go do it. Because I promise you, if you don't spend with them, they will do it. And honestly, I think nobody's really had the gall to actually do that. And so I think as a result, you just kind of keep living in this fragmented world. You have a lot of these huge apps and CTV publishers that have their own proprietary first-party data that don't want to share that, are going to keep that.
There's an incentive for some of these walled gardens to keep it within their garden.
And the revenue keeps growing. So it's why would they not do that? So until somebody has, the ability to actually say no, I think I don't see this necessarily changing in the near term, but I do think that's obviously a broader issue that we are all going to kind of talk about.
So it's a call to action from agencies and brands in the room to insist on better addressability.
Much easier said than done, though. I get that.
You've been doing it for 9 years, 7 years. Morena.
Yes, and thank you for the tee up there. One of the core benefits of having an identity infrastructure is that it spans cross-channels. So you can do holistic measurement, you can do audience onboarding across those channels. And I think in order to attract and to grow programmatic revenue, the CTV industry needs to overcome this challenge of targeting and measurement. So it's really important to embrace identity solutions to enable holistic frequency, to grow yield, and to operate in a privacy-first way, because buyers will want to target inventory that is passing the right parameters, and we're very much hearing that from the buy side too.
Alex, fragmentation, different devices. How can you measure? How can you target across all these different options?
I think from our side, when we look at it, we bring it down to context and audiences and how we can pretty much look at that, that kind of connect, so to speak. So that's what we look at, because obviously we just talked about it, that targeting isn't as advanced as we want it to be compared to other channels, but we are making the best of what we can. And so working with different data partners to be able to do that, or looking at what we're getting passed through, what the genre is, what the shows are, and being able to communicate that obviously to the buy side and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we packaged it up for you. That's kind of how we have been looking at it, and being obviously super transparent with our clients as to what is happening and what we're passing through that
Sounds
stream.
very manual. Is it manual?
Well, it's not on my team, so I can't say.
Okay, so none of you have answered the frequency cap question, and I do a lot of panels on connected TV, and this issue around frequency capping is so persistent in all countries. So how can we improve that? Are we giving up? I get unlimited ads for the same thing when I watch telly. Thomas? Do you need a better ad server?
Clearly, you're watching YouTube too much.
How-to videos.
Yeah. But I'm not going to go down the frequency capping line because it's... but I want to go back to... I'll get to it.
Our
I'll get
panelists
to
will
it.
be available
No.
later.
After drinks, we'll talk about it.
Over
I'll get
drinks
to it.
about frequency capping.
No, but think about the publisher's perspective. It's petrifying right now for them to do anything with data and not have the visibility as to what gets done with it. If you're as you call them, a wall garden, I think, are we past that term? Is that still going on? It's still going on.
People are still walling
Still
their
using
gardens.
it. Okay. I wish we had a new one, but if you think about, that's an end-to-end system, right? That is control from sort of buy side to publisher side. For how long, we don't know. Ari's going to tell us in a minute. But for now, it's that. So there's a relative level of comfort for everybody involved, and so you have that relative comfort, even though again, the quality might not be there. For a system that relies on third party, that's really where the trust has to come in, and you have to make sure that the systems, our system on the publisher side, and other system on the buy side have certified the publisher or the buyer that the data that they have spent so much money putting together and aggregating on behalf of their customers stays within that control environment. And that's the big one. Until we solve that, we're not going to be able to pass that test.
So can I just add to that really quick? I agree with that, because we do hear from client publishers that we work with on our sites, like, oh, the buy side keeps asking for A, B, and C, but they're not telling us what we're doing. So I think the openness of the conversation and the transparency between supply and buy side is still not 100% there. If we're still hearing from the sell side, they're asking for everything, and we're trying to pass it through, but they're not giving us enough to know why we're doing it, what are the benefits. Well, there's some revenue benefits, but why do you actually need all this data? So yeah, just to bounce off of what you said.
But on that point, though, I think the data that they want is, again, you go back to linear TV. Yeah. You buy a linear TV ad, you know exactly when it's going to run. You don't necessarily know who's going to watch it, so there's a disconnect there. But you know exactly where it is. You know it's brand safe. All the things that kind of come with that. In CTV, that doesn't happen. Right? You talk about the content objects, Alex, and like most of those aren't being shared. Most of those are completely inadequate from the perspective of understanding where your ads are actually running. And then the punch to the stomach is the fact that, hey, we're going to hit that same person with the same ad 15 times because frequency capping hasn't really been figured out for a number of reasons. And I think a big part of that is because basically the right IDs aren't being passed. Right? Matt talked about this a little bit ago. in CTV, you really have two kind of unique identifiers, IP address and some sort of unique device ID. Those are really kind of your two main signals to try to kind of capture and cap who is being exposed to an ad. And quite frankly, a lot of publishers aren't sharing either full IP address or they're not sharing their device ID. So they're basically preventing the opportunity for anybody to put frequency capping on a campaign. And I think an ad server could do that, of course, but at the end of the day, they're not sharing that. And this also goes back to what you were talking about earlier, Alex, where like honestly the buy side is completely unaware or seemingly unaware of the fact that most inventory is shared. Meaning, you might have a specific fast channel that is doing an inventory share agreement where that inventory is basically being split across multiple publishers, partners. And while it's unique in the sense that like one of those partners owns that inventory, it's all the same household at the end of the day. And if they're all sending different signals, like managing frequency is just nearly impossible. So again, there's no parity, I think, across the sell side, but also the buy side doesn't really know what they're asking for either at the end of the day, because they're not being told what's out there.
I feel like we could fix it with everybody in the room. There's like all the people that we need, and Alex says we're not getting the information we need, so we could just get our heads together maybe in the coffee break. But you mentioned device ID and IP address. There's another option, which is logged in users. So I know that a lot of the broadcasters now are asking for logged in users, not in fast channels, of course, but in some of their AVOD services and their, I told Chris a new word yesterday, SAVOD, the subscription ad video on demand. Morwenna,
Yeah.
is logged in users just the answer? Should we just get everybody to log in and then we can target, cap, measure?
No, I think there is a bit of a, please excuse my voice, there's a bit of a misconception in the sense that, as mentioned, we are seeing so much growth coming from the AVOD and fast channels, and not all of those have logged in users. In fact, a lot of them don't. And so but those publishers have a right to develop a monetization strategy. And so in those cases, it's really important to lean into identity solutions and to work with players that can offer, again, a privacy-safe mechanism to leverage and monetize both your authenticated and non-authenticated users. And I think there are so many privacy concerns around those mechanisms for those users too, right? It's logged in users is often siloed, of course, and it's often tied to PII. So again, another big reason to lean into identity solutions in the market. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, again, I go back to it's like logged in data just feeds the biggest player in the room, right? It just keeps going back to like, okay, fine, we're going to have the same walled gardens, like fortress castles, whatever we want to call them these days. It's going to keep going back to the same big players because they're going to have the most amount of data and they're going to force this. But it still goes back at the end of the day, that's the TV's a household product, right? I still go back to the fact of like, okay, great, you have the one person who set that device up at the very beginning. Does that represent the entire household? Sure, you've got individual profiles, but are people really doing that? Like, usually you might have an adults and a kids section, but that's about the difference. I don't think people are actually going into their individual profiles unless they're sharing passwords.
Do you log in as your wife?
Absolutely. I do worry.
Do we all
Hey, don't
log
ask what I
in
do on the weekend, all
as
right?
someone else?
I mean, I don't know. I just think it's like, it goes back to like, I think there has to be more than just login information. Like the reality of it is people just aren't going to all log in. You have to find a way to get past that. That's only kind of skin deep. You have to kind of get beneath that surface if you want to actually have a true identity solution. That's why I think there's a need for identity, right? To actually get past that. But that's going to require them to allow, like a lot of those big publishers that have that first party data, it's going to require them to accept the identity solutions that the market is demanding on them. So again, I keep going back to that demand has to be there. Otherwise.
Yeah. So Morwenna, you raised privacy. Mm-hmm. So how do you see the future of privacy regulation when it comes to connected television addressability? And what strategies should the different stakeholders adopt to future-proof themselves?
Privacy, excuse me again, privacy regulations are already impacting CTV in a very similar way to what we've seen across a desktop. IP is not going to be around long term, and those that are investing in buying streaming across a multitude of streaming platforms are, constantly looking at ways to extract privacy in the most compliant way. We know that there is a prevalence of CMPs across desktop, of course, and there are CMPs in CTV too, because the TV manufacturers that have advertising services and the AVOD apps within the TVs need to adhere to those regulations as well. And so they want to adopt CMPs to ensure that they're compliant with the IAB transparency and consent framework, for example. So I think the market is already shifting towards to support a privacy safe value chain, and because the parameters are effectively already in place.
Chris, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I think the CMP and that consent framework is huge, and that's what's going to be kind of the first step, I think, towards getting to this solution. And it's happening. You know, we're seeing it across the board. I mean, I think, you know, from both kind of the ad tech side, like that's becoming a requirement. So I think that's going to again help kind of expedite this process. But again, it just still kind of comes back to like CTV. It's understanding who and how, right? Like who are actually seeing these ads? Like that has to tie back to an identity that's then giving a representation that everybody's in agreement with. And I still just fundamentally go back to that. Like what is that buying standard that sits there? But I think the CMP is obviously critical, and that will then allow identity to kind of continue to gain more exposure and just gain more footprint, because that's obviously I think what the industry needs.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we've heard a lot of buzzwords there. I'm just going to ask one final question that you all get to answer. Start with you, Alex. So, you know, we have probably everybody in the room that could get our heads together and solve it. You said that fundamentally you think it's a communication issue. But let me ask you all, like what's your ask of the audience? What's your ask of the buy side, the supply side, or whatever, to make a better addressability ecosystem in connected TV over the next 12 months?
Yeah, I think I've said it already. I think it's communicating, it's being transparent with each other about what is needed in terms of what we need to be doing. We just need to make everything a little bit better. There's the scale that we already talked about, that we are in agreement of that, but we just need to make everything a little bit better. We're not going to hit the utopian, perfect what we discussed at the very beginning tomorrow or in the next 12 to 18 months, but we'll be maybe hopefully a little bit better than where we are currently.
Moena?
I think now is the time to lean into identity solutions and to generate learnings. So for streaming pubs that want to attract programmatic demand, it's working with the right identifiers that the buy side want to target. We're already seeing the usage of CMPs, which is great. We need to continue to see that. Both of those pieces are really important. As mentioned, logged in users, non-authenticated users, lean into solutions that help you leverage both those audiences. I think it's about testing, it's about learning, and it's about measuring in the next 12 months.
That's a lot.
Sorry.
That's a lot of us. Chris?
It's still in November. We've got that gives us about 14
got
months
18.
now if we count through the end of next year. So I would say, and again, this is obviously kind of a bit naive, but what I would say is like, listen, if I go to a brand or an agency, tell me how much money you're willing to spend with me, and then let's actually create our own CTV sandbox. And what I would say is basically if you're going to arbitrarily commit to a budget that, you know, is based off of our proportionate scale, tell us what you need. Like the concern from a publisher's perspective is we don't want to share all this information around program level content, because the fear is that you're not actually going to be using it effectively and you're going to be cherry picking, spending less money with us. So we don't think it's actually being used and leveraged correctly. So I say, let's get our cards on the table and let's figure out if there's a commercial arrangement we're all happy with, because I think that's happening at the broadcast level. If we can do that with the CTV publishers, put those cards on the table, tell us what you need, and then let's figure out what that solution is. And then if we're not willing to share it, take money off, right? Let's play that game. And I think it's just again, let's just be open and transparent about what's out there.
Okay, so Thomas, I'm going to double click on something you said earlier, which is that people are comfortable in the current situation. Not loving it, but comfortable. So what would your ask be of this audience to be maybe a bit better than comfortable?
Well, I'm going to come back on what I said to confirm it, because it's too easy right now to mention the word CTV and just think that's it. Like what do you do in life? I work in CTV. Or, what does your company do? We sell CTV ads. And, you keep just reading the reports, the financial reports, and everybody's just like, yeah, even the bigger firms say, we don't do display anymore. We just do CTV. And that's a little bit our fall the last 3-4 years, because it was great. Like, it's worked super well I don't know, hopefully it's worked super well for everybody in the room, but it has worked well for a lot of people just to say, I'm either in the business of buying CTV or selling CTV, But now we're getting to the point where there's almost too much non-distinct CTV supply that, yeah, I'm not surprised somebody at an agency or an advertiser is quite pissed off because they see their ads 15 times, like at home. Like, I'm sick of myself. I see, not me, but I'm sick of seeing my own car brand appear on every single ad. So we, one, need to simplify the path from that buyer to that screen. And it includes the login, it includes the right sort of ease of consent collection, which has to be a requirement on every single device. But it also needs to be standardized. Like, what is what's a mid-roll in fast? Because right now, I'm not saying it has to be a mid-roll. There's no mid-roll in fast. But if you're a buyer, do you even know what you're buying? You know what you're buying in TV. You're buying the spot after the weather. Yeah. Okay, that's not super exciting, but at least you know what you're buying. But in CTV, there's no spot after the weather. There's not even a mid-roll. There's a pre-roll when people collect, or there's a home screen. But so that standardization is probably something that I would say we must agree on what these terms mean.
Okay, we could have done a whole panel on defining connected television or even defining TV, but I think you've all hit on great points. We need to collaborate. You said earlier about a lack of trust. So if we could get over the trust, we can collaborate more with the people in the room. We need an infrastructure, Morwenna says, with a set of standards. Chris says we just need to be more honest with each other. And Thomas, you say we have had the golden days of connected TV through the pandemic where everybody is at home watching. There's a huge amount of supply, but now it's time to get beyond just comfortable, beyond doing well enough, and to really be able to address that question that came up in the survey. Great place to conclude. Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panelists, Thomas, Chris, Morwenna, and Alex.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, JB, for moderating that expertly as usual. It feels to me like we're back in 2019 or 2020 on the web. The discussion about publishers being scared, about this adoption curve, about this network effect is exactly the discussion we had, 5 years ago when we started ID5, 6 years ago. So it's like we're seeing that inflection point in our discussion with broadcasters and TV platforms. So it's really exciting to be here. Now we're going to look at a part of the industry that has moved forward, a part of the industry that has embraced new ways of doing things, new ways of recognizing audiences, new ways of measuring campaign performance. We're going to look at web publishers. Again, back in 2018, 2019, we had the same kind of discussions, right? Oh, should I make my audiences available? What about data leakage? Huge problem, right? How do I collect consent? All of those discussions were there on the web. Some publishers have moved forward and successfully. And so we have a few of them here, publishers and publisher partners that are going to come and tell us about how they've thought about or rethought about their monetization strategy in this new context with those new signals and those new identity capabilities. So please welcome the publisher panel.
Everyone sitting under the chair. There we go. So, hi everyone. I'm Davide here, VP of Product ID5, and I'm joined by three amazing panelists that will introduce themselves in a second. Too quick, George there. Always. And we're going to talk about what has changed and how things are going in the good old web. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. George?
Yeah, George Odysseus, Chief Commercial Officer at Planet Sport. We're an independent sports publisher with a number of titles under our umbrella.
Nino Stiliano at Mum. That was loud, sorry. There I am, Head of Programmatic Yield at Mumsnet. We're the #1 parenting site for the UK.
My name is Moraka Georgieva. I'm the Director of Global Customer Success at Primitive. We're an audience platform working with about 150 of the world's most premium publishers, and recently also with some advertisers. Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
So let's start to kick it off with something that has actually not changed. I was doing some research just before now, and if we had this panel in January, it would have been 5 years since Google announced that they were deprecating third-party cookies. Should have had like a little cake on stage, I think. And, you know, obviously, since then, they've decided that they're not going to deprecate any more third-party cookie, and instead they're going to have a cookie light version, I believe is the official term, with user being able to opt out. I'm curious to get your views on that. How have you guys moved forward? We heard in Saudi, in the State of Digital Identity report, that, you know, everyone pretty much has moved forward, but let's hear George.
Yeah, any publisher that is waiting for Google to do what they can plan to do with cookies is probably following the wrong path. Now, let's be straight. Google is a public company. It's there to service its shareholders and by generating as maximum profit as possible. So, you know, I think, you know, the reason they didn't deprecate because the sandbox, etc., wasn't working properly, and it will probably impact their bottom line, and for no other reason. And as publishers, you know, we only have limited control. You know, ultimately, it's the buy side who utilize the cookies to set up to buy, and so we need to, like I think the previous panel, sort of optimize the addressability and working with, you know, whether it be external ID providers, etc. And we need to, you know, push on with that. You know, what they've announced is essentially a slow death for cookies, as opposed to, you know, ripping the Band-Aid off. I mean, I was looking forward to cookies going because, I don't know, I'm bored of the discussion. And I felt, I mean, the bit that I didn't like is that they wanted to do it in September. And I thought, come on. You know, at least do it in January, not just prior to Q4.
Well, since then, the data has changed so many times. I think you go every month of the year, to be honest.
So I think, I think we should carry on. But I'm looking forward to the time when they do stick it off, because I think whilst there are cookies out there, you know, let's not ignore the fact that 30-40% of our inventory has no cookies anyway. And that's only going to increase slowly. So we just need to accelerate to the solutions and act like there are no cookies, because, you know, there's enough inventory out there without. So
yeah, I'll go. So it was 5 years, like you said, but I guarantee no one did anything for a good 3 to 4 years anyway. Like you know, Mumsnet ourselves, you know, the looming Q4 no cookies in Chrome is quite scary. So we jumped on a lot of the identity bandwagons and we implemented a lot. And, you know, once they announced it wasn't happening, initially we're like, oh, that was a lot of work. But then we're like, well, hold on. Let's look at our Safari activity and let's see how that's benefited. And actually we see that we're closing the gap. And what's really exciting for, you know, previously you're looking at 20, 25 to 30% difference in CPM, and now that's closing less than 20, close approaching to 10, which is incredible. And that is because of all of these frameworks and that list of things that publishers are implementing. And if you ask Mumsnet what we've done out of all of those, the answer is yes, basically all of them, to try and obviously offset the looming revenue loss. So when it comes to a cookie-like version, our reaction is, okay, when's it going to happen? We're ready, is basically, and we can't do much about it. I mean, our biggest concern is consent over the last year. Obviously, the news of cookie was like, oh no, well, it's great because actually there's a consent issue that we need to deal with that, you know, a lot of big publishers have been dealing with for the last, you know, few months as it is. So that took us way more time and is much more impactful at the moment than the potential of a cookie-light Chrome, so to speak. So.
Yeah, absolutely. When Google kind of announced that the cookie was not deprecating or deprecating slowly, I think for me personally that was this big almost relief, because it was finally time for us to say, this is not about the cookie. I think that in the show together was obsessing with this thing. I'm like, there's this big tech company, they're going to make a decision and then we're going to decide if we live or die as businesses. And like we have seen, we work with many publishers out there who like Nino's team, like Mumsnet, have decided to take their own faith in their hands and implement solutions that that mean that they will be successful regardless of what Google does, right? And like we saw that this entire discussion that we're having about whether we'll have cookies, we won't have cookies, is not about the cookie. It's about consumer choice. And Google has obviously seen this trend, and instead of them making the decision, as George said, to roll out the privacy sandbox without any guarantee of how this is going to look like to the industry, they're taking this decision and giving it to the consumer, because they know that the consumer is going to make the decision not to be tracked cross-domain by folks who don't have a direct relationship with them. And so if there's anybody in this room who thinks that the cookie won't disappear and is not preparing for a cookieless future, please don't succumb to this very false sense of security. It is happening. We see that anywhere up to 70% of the impressions that our publishers are serving do not have a cookie today already. And so because of consent, because of the browser, because of many different reasons that are not Google. And so please do things to arm yourself for a world without cookies, and a world where you own your revenue and your outcomes.
And moving away from Google a little bit, we'll come back to them for sure. Obviously, in the past few years, there have been different ways in which publishers have tried to increase their revenue, regardless of cookie or cookieless environment. One of them is bid enrichment, which has been particularly, I would say, on the news recently with the IB provenance spec to be more transparent towards the buy side, and how bid enrichment happen. Nino, what's your thought on bid enrichment in general?
In general?
In general, and for you specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. I think bid enrichment's fantastic. It's identifying inventory that wouldn't necessarily be attractive to buyers, and all of a sudden it is. So for cookie environments, it's actually just adding bid density. So you're just getting more bids in an environment where you had bids already. Great, drive out that CPM. And then in the non-cookie environments, it's great. I'm getting some fill. Fantastic. So yeah, for us, it's really important, and that's where I was talking about the value of our Safari. That's predominantly what it's been. It's been that fill value actually going up, which is brilliant. So seeing more bid rates, better matching. It's been much better in that environment. So yeah, bid enrichment is really important for us.
Yeah, I'll echo Nino that. I think from our perspective, the last sort of 12 months and seeing the impact of the bid enrichment that we've applied, especially in the open marketplace, has sort of led us to sleep a lot easier. If cookies were going to get deprecated, and as I said earlier, is at the point now where I think we should just let them go. Let them be, and not have to talk about them again. So. And bid enrichment, whether number of partners that a publisher can work with, and it's a fairly simple strategy, and it works, and it took a lot of the fear out of what would happen. Because I think if it was 18 months ago, as publishers, we would have been sitting there thinking it's going to be touch and go whether we can keep going, unless you've got deep reserves. So yeah, absolutely, very important.
And it's interesting because bid enrichment, as you said, is the last 18 months. I would say that 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it didn't used to be discussed very much as a topic. Yeah, it's always been there, right, in certain ways. And I think it's become probably more mainstream also since there has been an attempt to make it more transparent to the buy side, which is the work that the IB has done.
Yeah, I think what's changed is probably adoption on the buy side to recognising the factors that were being pushed through the bid stream. So, and we follow the money, and it's we'll do what it takes to try and sell. So it was always about the buy side adoption, and I think with whether it was met or not, the July date or the 1% etc. increasing, I think led the buy side to try different things. So I think that's and I think that would accelerate if they just said put a date on it. And because I remember speaking to one major DSP, and I said, is it the case that there's just enough cookied inventory out there for you guys to achieve what you want to achieve? And he basically said yes. So, I
think that's an interesting point, and it's something that we hear from a lot of our publishers when in an agency environment, in that programmatic use case. There's a lot of agencies have the the impression that there is enough cookies out there to achieve what you want to achieve, and we see a lot of spending going into Chrome. But it's interesting when we have conversations on the buy side. One of the things that the buy side is saying, there are big advertisers out there that have spent years and a lot of money and a lot of resource building out huge amounts of first-party data and their own logged-in users, and now they're trying to find them on the web. And maybe they have cookies on 5 million users. They put them in their DSP. All of a sudden, there's 500,000. And so the advertiser or the brand directly is feeling this incredible push to, or that squeeze of not being able to identify the users and your consumers that you were able to identify like 2-3 years ago. And so they're looking to publishers, they're looking to their partners in market to tell them what those users are, because this is where the consumer spends time up the funnel. And so I think that it's a balance between like the cookies are going to be here for some time, and they will transition to other IDs or other ways to do bid enrichment, which is a fantastic practice. But there's also a lot of value in those direct use cases where the publisher understands the value of their own data and their own full environment to give the advertiser what they need.
Yeah, and just to add to that, absolutely. We were on the precipice of Chrome cookies about to go, so I'm glad buyers decided to start testing, which is great. And I think what a lot of them discovered, and having conversations with a few agency trading desks, is, oh look, Safari's cheaper if you have the right identity. So it's like, well, it's a no-brainer. You get access to way more reach with less competition. It makes sense, and I'm glad that trend has started. It's still going, and it's still continuing, because I can see that identity and bid enrichment is going to become stronger and stronger.
And just to change on another trend, curation. I hear curation is the best thing since sliced bread. I hear curation is the worst thing ever.
That's how it goes in our industry. Nothing is ever balanced. It's even the worst or the best.
Is it black or is it white? I don't know.
Best thing for who? Publishers or advertisers?
I think it's a publisher panel.
Yeah. Yeah. I come from an ad network background. And
what's the difference?
Well, I'll come on to that. Patience. And in an ad network, and we had a direct relationship with the publisher generally. And I've seen what curation can do, and it's a powerful tool. But it doesn't involve it doesn't have to involve any direct integration with a publisher. You can go onto the open marketplace, curate a number of different publishers that, so buy for walled garden, or use the alternative use of that word, of publishers, optimize across that. But does it benefit the publishers if this all they're buying is at open market rates? And if anything, it will provide increased competition to any direct sales if you're working with, because suddenly, let's say for our example, we've got sports, we've got a rugby audience, they can go and buy the top 20 rugby sites, and rather than working with 20 individuals. So I think I like the idea of curation. It's probably like ad network 10.0. I mean, I think there's Kieran's in the room somewhere. I always said the ad network never died. It just changed its clothes. And I remember we were at Tribal Fusion in 2010, and we called it ad network. I think, is it 4.0, Chantal? We'll call it 4.0 in 2010. Where is it now? And all these are just different iterations of an ad network. If you sit between supply and demand, to me, your form of ad network. So, but curation is an interesting one, but I'd like to see more direct recognition of like what they're buying, and more control for publishers. I think the biggest problem for publishers in the open marketplace is lack of control. We can control floor prices and say, well, you can't buy this, but we can block certain categories, etc. But it's publishers need more control in the ecosystem.
So the curator need to curate more the control that they have with the publishers.
Yeah, I think they need to look at somehow building a direct relationship. If you want to curate my inventory, you should pay a premium. How can I enforce that? So it's probably talking to the SSPs, understanding who's curating. Otherwise, it could be an option, and if there's any curators in the room, I apologise, blocking the curator and say, well, but me on my own makes no difference. Publishers need to collaborate, work together to do what's right for for us. You know, we take, 20% of the spend, if that. And we don't compete with each other. We're competing against all the other mass targeting available. So, you know, so it comes out the word collaboration between publishers and acting in unison.
And Nino, based on what George is saying, whose responsibility is it to implement this control? Is it the curator? Is it the SSP? Or the publisher themselves? Where does the responsibility lie?
A bit of both. I think publisher has to take it upon themselves to actually vet some of these. I mean, you have to vet the curated deals, right? It's quite easy. We can go into our major SSP platforms and see the curation deals and really be like, okay, well, how are they getting this data? And then once you understand that, and they give you some contextual example, usually, and it's like, okay, well, is the buyer aware of that? Are the buyers aware of it being only contextual, or is it audience-based based on other signals? Are they selling it as a first-party signal, or are they selling it as a consortium of publishers? And it's important to have those conversations with the buyers and the SSPs to establish that control and say, oh, well, hold on, maybe not with that one. Or our approach, and Ajoy sitting over there, goes out and shares our own curated, like, you know, if you're going to use curation, why don't you use this private auction that we've actually surfaced in this SSP or in your DSP, so you can add that to your curation because this is our signals and it's our first party data. So it's taking an active role whilst at the same time vetting what is in the market. There's always going to be that long tail that are going to be arbitraging, you know, God knows what. And there is going to always be, I think, a little bit of lack of control, but control what you can. Make sure you have those good relationships with your SSPs, your DSPs. That's probably my advice on that one.
Yeah, I love that point. I think because curation has kind of come up as a result of the loss of revenue or loss of impressions that we're seeing in the OMP, it's easy to go down the slippery slope that is just going to be a plug and play solution like the OMP was, right? Like that's how we used to promote the OMP. Plug and play, dollars are just going to flow through you. And where are we now? There's no control, as George says, no transparency in the OMP. And so I think that curation, definitely a double-edged sword, right? Like you can definitely think that you can plug and play, and there's going to be people in the middle that might place contextual and whatever other elements on top of your inventory or do some arbitraging, and then you're losing that control and that transparency. But there's a huge opportunity in there if you're taking control and you know exactly what signals you're making available to the curator, you know what curators you're working with, and you develop an understanding of the value of your different signals. So every publisher is going to have a deep understanding of the types of data and the types of signals that are the strongest and most valuable for them. These are the signals you should be selling directly. Like these are the highest valuable. Like if you're a mostly automotive publisher, obviously these are not the kind of audiences that you want to be making available for curation. This is what you arm your sales teams with to go and like increase your direct sold revenue. The things that you want to sell at scale, like the signals that you want to make a bit more CPM and revenue than the open marketplace, but you still need to sell at scale. This is what goes into those curation streams, and you maintain control of what's out there.
I think, just bouncing off that, I think it's just an education piece. As long as we're discussing that with buyers, agencies, and like, okay, you're buying curated seats, but what does that actually mean for you in, you know, a publisher ad stack? You know, you're an OMP buyer. You're not taking. You might beat a few bids in the SSP, but realistically, when it comes to the ad server, you're only slightly above probably OMP. And it's really understanding, okay, do you want to have that level of access, or do you want to take that step higher, PMP, a private auction, or a PG?
So we've done the past with cookie deprecation, we've done the present with current monetization trend. On the future, I want to go back full circle to Google. As you guys are aware, DOJ trial going on, potential breakup. If I can literally get 2 bullet points from you guys of what he thinks it will mean for you in the next few years, if any at all.
For me, the first thing is like this trial has consumed my life. I don't know if anybody else was reading the RF Power newsletters, for example, but it was every day and it was everything for me. And I hope that they do a Netflix documentary on that case, because it's going to attract some audience. It's interesting. I think that it's very clear that as an industry for a very long time we have waited for our fate to be decided by a few big players, and to an extent, like there are, that there is sometimes positives to having this a company with so much resource that makes decisions and saves all of us a little bit of thinking. But on the other hand, it stifles innovation. And it just means that folks that have really bright ideas and go to market first, sometimes they're not able to get the value that they expect from them. And so I think that I'm hoping that as an industry, we're asking ourselves, what are the kind of partners that we want to be partnering with? Do we want to go with the biggest, strongest company out there that's going to tell us how things are going to happen? Or do we want to be building relationships with our partners that allow us together to innovate and get better every day? And I hope that we're all asking ourselves this question.
You go next.
Yeah. Listen, we all know Google, their size, their power, with data being the currency for information and content exchange and everything else. It's the new oil, and it's essentially Google's able to apply monopolistic behavior, and no government, wants that within the industry because of what it can imply. So it's going to take years. I don't think some of us will be probably, sitting on a beach by the time they conclude anything. So I'll be honest, I'm not thinking too much about it. But it's going to take a long time for them to disentangle it, and there'll be winners and there'll be losers. And Google, some of the smartest in the room, and having their search and giving free consumer products, etc. It's going to be a lot more column inches, dedicated to how they're going to break them up, or if they're going to break them up, and then how, and sort of diluting the power. But then you can have Meta, etc. I think it's a political angle as well. So it'd be interesting to see what happens now, given who's ended up in the White House.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, when it comes, we'll have to react to it. Similar to the Chrome deprecation, it's not something that's even on our radar, and not something I'm too worried about at this point. It's interesting. Oh, okay, great. But ultimately, sellers are going to try and sell the easiest way they can. Buyers are going to buy the easiest way they can. Does that change realistically the ecosystem that we'll see after this potential breakup? Who knows? But we have to deal with that when it gets closer.
Well, one thing is for sure, the DOJ will be quite busy for the next few years, I think. Just with a couple of companies that you mentioned, George, it will probably take them years to get to the bottom of it. That was it for our panel. Thank you very much for joining me. A round of applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Davide, before we dismiss the panel, just 1 second, guys, because we'll have a full session about this later. But I just want to I remember ATS a few weeks ago. Kieran had a panel of buyers and publishers talking about potential breakup, and some of the comments coming back from the panel was like, "I can't deal with it. Like, they handled everything for me. If they're not there anymore, how am I going to survive?" What's your take on this? Positive or negative? Google breakup, if say GAM and ADX and like all those things, from a publisher point of view, is that a risk or is that an opportunity? Does it create does it oxygenate the room and give you access to more margin? Because they've been keeping like 50% for themselves, right? So you would say that, or is it more complicated because all of a sudden you got to change ad server, you got to find new ways to kind of access Google demand, and like, what's your hot take on this?
Yeah, I mean, Google might take 50%, but that's because they're taking from both sides, right? I assume that's where the 50%
Still,
comes from,
that's a lot of money that's left on the table,
we lose 50% in the other side as well. So, if not more, probably close to 60, 70. So, I think the services that Google provides aren't going to disappear. If they, they'll have to be forced to spin them off or something. The services will be there. I think inevitably, potentially, because that search revenue subsidise so much of the other parts of the business. I mean, it's still 90% of their profit is driven by search. Correct me if I'm wrong. Potentially it could mean higher costs, to publishers. Especially small ones. Free ad server, for example. Free in inverted commas, but they could
quote unquote.
could mean incremental costs, for the buy and sell side, because they utilise the revenues and profit search first to grow the business and gain market share and effectively subsidise. So, Google hasn't never successfully divested itself away from search and YouTube revenue. So, but it funds the rest of the business. So it could be a bit chaotic and then spin off. But as I say, I think it will take years for it to untangle.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that.
Be 2030 panel of ID5 talking about the same thing.
But we don't care because we'll be on the beach, you said, right?
Hopefully. I will be.
You will be? Okay.
All free to welcome.
Nino, what do you think?
I mean, 8 years ago, at Publisher, it was like Google took around 65 to 70% of revenue for us. Sorry, not the take rate. Sorry, that they made us that amount. And since then, I mean, talking to publishers, the diversification away from Google has been astronomical. Like there's so many new SSPs and rising stars in the market now for display publishers that if the AdX portion, obviously, if the take rates disappeared, fantastic, winning. Actually, they might even become more a big thing if they are spun out as a separate AdX, and we have to deal with them as a separate demand partner. We have to deal with them as a separate demand partner. The ad server a bit scary, I think, because what ridiculous percentage of publishers use GAM? It's insane, right? And that is probably the biggest. I'm hoping they wouldn't do anything to that. It just stays the same, and it's everything else that's spun out, because that would be a massive unfurling of things to do. That's scary, but everything else, in my perspective, is not scary at all, and I'm not panicking.
I guess perhaps slightly naively, I tried to offer a slightly more optimistic perspective. I think at the end of the day, I think we talk a lot about what will happen, the split up of Google, and not so much on the how. And my hope is there is a lot of people in the DOJ and who have been on that case who are thinking about the how and how the breakup will happen. The people who testified in that case, there's a ton of publishers. We heard from Steph Laser at News Corp and Jenna and Business Insider and so forth. Big publishers that drive journalism. Publishers don't just create content. They are, and I believe this with my entire heart, they're the pinnacle of democracy. That's why we live in a free society, because they're publishers that publish journalism. And the DOJ had this case because they were worried that the way Google functions is a threat to that. And so my hope is that there will be a lot of conversation about how does this breakup happen if it happens, such that it doesn't put publishers in even bigger trouble than they already are. And so if there's any forum for us to advocate, Primitive definitely will be, and then I definitely encourage everybody else to get involved here.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. Every time we have an ID5 event, we have a panel, a publisher panel, because that's how we started. That's where it starts, actually, from a technical standpoint, from an identity standpoint. We are going to live in a first-party world, and first parties are websites, apps, right? They are the party that you interact with. They are the one who own the relationship, who control the relationship with users, and so it all starts with them. And it's really interesting to see how much publishers go from fear to hope as they go through this transition. Initially, there's a lot of fears. There's a lot of doubts, right? Am I going to be better off, right? What's the risk for me? It wasn't working great, but it was working. Or at least I knew how it was working, and I don't know how it's going to work in the future. So that's a scary prospect. But then when we are able to move on and to implement new ways of doing things, publishers are seeing the benefit. As Nino said, you're seeing the uplift in CPMs on less identifiable environment like Safari. So it's creating a lot of opportunities, and it's really breaking past those fears, breaking past those kind of, we've always been doing it that way, that really matters and makes a difference. I have the very difficult task of having to fill the air for a few minutes as we wait for our next speaker. Do we have any questions? Anyone wants to ask a question for the previous panelists? I think most of them are still there. No? I'm not going to sing, because that would be a very, very bad idea. Oh, Mr. Paparo, welcome. Yes. So the question, for if anyone hasn't understood, is from Harry Paparo, sitting on the first row, getting ready for his panel right after the next one. We hear a lot about IP addresses going away. Is it a reality or is it just fake news? And if they are, how are they going away? That's a really good question because we talked about a lot about IP address in CTV before, right? It's a massive signal that a lot of buyers are using to recognize, collect data, recognize users, frequency cap. It is going away in part. It is going away for third parties. There's two types of citizens on the web: first party and third parties. First party is technically it's the server you interact with your device, right? So when you log on, when you open your phone, you open your computer, you connect to a server, and then that server works with other servers. The first one is the first party. The other one are the third parties. Third parties are pretty much blind. They don't have access to cookies anymore in a lot of browsers. They have very, very limited access to IP addresses. That's the part that's getting removed. First party access to IP address is pretty much impossible to remove, otherwise you cannot route the content. Or you need another server in the middle, which is a proxy. And that's when you're not removing IP address, but basically you're passing an IP address of a proxy server that nobody cares about because it's in a server farm somewhere in Virginia, your new favorite state. So yes and no. Yes, as a third party, everybody pretty much now is blind to IP addresses, as they are blind to cookies, right? And so that's where my point earlier about the opportunities for publishers. Publishers, as first parties, have access to all those signals, have the ability to resolve a user's identity, to recognize users over time, and they control how they make sense of that information and how they pass that information downstream to their buy-side partners. So in the 140 characters or the 280 characters summary, people say IP address are going away. There's a lot of nuances to that. And that's why when we started ID5, we went first party. We went to publishers. And we worked with publishers to get access to the signal that they have, which are not available to anyone sitting behind them, which are not available to most of the technology players who are just kind of listening in into the bitstream, listening in through cookie syncing, listening in through that third-party access to the device, because that position is becoming less and less useful from a recognition standpoint, from a data signal access standpoint. Anyone wants to follow up on another question? It's difficult to follow up after Ari. Yes? Don't get me started. No, yes, all of that is ID5 sales. No, there's no sales pitch. There's a bunch of people from our sales team here that you can catch up with after the event at the drinks. But we've always believed in educating the market. There's a lot of technical complexity. There's a lot of technical nuances to what we do, to how our industry operates, right? But to what we do, particularly at ID5. Case in point with the IP address question, right? Don't get me started on probabilistic versus deterministic, right? That's another whole area of like massive oversimplification where we're losing the entire substance of what we do. So we think by helping the market understand how things work, understand their problem, understand the solutions, we can raise the bar and eventually make people more educated and more able to understand how to work with ID5 and other solutions to improve monetization, improve measurements, improve the entire digital ecosystem, frequency capping on TV, right? The entire ecosystem that we work with. But if you want to be sold to, don't worry. There's a lot of people here whose job it is to do that. I get lots of thumbs up signals, so I'm going to have to stop taking questions, fill the air, hopefully. I don't have the clicker, actually. Do you mind just going to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, no, not this one.
It's a funny clicker.
It's a funny clicker for sure. All right, okay. I'm very happy to introduce someone who needs no introduction. Is it revenge for how late I was when we had dinner in New York a few weeks ago?
It's fine.
I'm sure it is.
I thought everybody'd be gone by now.
Have a seat. I haven't done your introduction yet. I was expecting to welcome you on stage, but I'll do it anyway.
Don't worry. Keep it short.
Well, a man who needs no introduction. As the CEO of WPP, built the biggest advertising company in the world.
More comfortable than I am. God, you're luxuriating in padded seating.
Have a seat for a minute if you want. That's going to be the next 30 minutes of my life. I'm dreading it. So he built the largest advertising company in the world. He then embarked on a new adventure with technology and data at the heart of a new generation of agency. He's also a prolific investor in ad tech and in some particularly promising companies, dare I say. And so he's worn multiple hats over the past 20 years, which give him a unique perspective on how our industry is evolving. So I'm very happy that he's agreed to share his point of view on those evolutions with us. Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Chairman of S4 Capital, Sir Martin Sorrell.
Sorry for being late.
You want to take the microphone?
Difficult to navigate here, but we made it in the end. Okay.
Much appreciate you being here.
Good.
So,
On a momentous day.
yes.
So how many people were surprised by the result? Oh, so how many people were not surprised by the result? Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Anybody have any misgivings about the result? How many people have misgivings about the result? How many people don't have misgivings about the result? Okay, all right. So there was a poll that came out today, a YouGov poll, which said that 57% of UK people interviewed were unhappy about the result. So I'm sure Keir Starmer is very unhappy about the result.
That's going to make for a lot of
David
interesting
Lammy is probably rehearsing his sort of speech where he apologizes for what he said.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of apologizing doing.
We shall see. I actually think it's pretty good for America, actually. Whether it's much good for anybody beyond America is another question. But I think for America...
Is it good for business? Is it going to be good for advertising?
It is good for business. I mean, it's an uncomfortable thing for business people to say for the obvious reason. But you know, if you get business people in their cups, as they say, or late at night, or in a more relaxed frame of mind, I think they are. You know, between Kamala and the Don, as they said on the front page of the New York Post, actually. If between the two, they would prefer the Don. And it's interesting because if you if you do a Slido poll or an anonymous poll with so-called business leaders or whatever, the biggest issue they have, it's not geopolitics, it's not climate change, it's not the economy, it's not uncertainty, it's regulation. And the Donald probably, he's not perfect from that point of view, because for the tech companies, probably not for Elon Musk, but for the tech companies, he's probably going to be an irritant, I would say.
Elon Musk and Palantir are safe.
Sorry?
Everybody else, Elon Musk and Palantir are safe. Everybody else
I
is
don't know
in
about
trouble.
Palantir, but Elon Musk's clearly, I mean, it's interesting. Probably whichever way it went, Elon was going to be okay. But actually, the only piece of data, I don't know whether anybody in the room, I'm sure you all followed it avidly from a data point of view, but the one piece of data I found useful at the end, it certainly wasn't the polls, was Elon Musk's R-D data, which was registered Republicans and registered Democrats at a point in time. He published the table on Twitter, on X, pretty frequently, every day or couple of days. And what he did was compare 2024 to 2020 for registered Republicans and registered Democrats that I think they were the ones that had voted. And what the figure was it was a plus for in most cases. Well, I think in all 7 swing states, there were more Republicans that had registered in 2024 and voted, and less Democrats. So the delta, R minus D, was positive for and that was that's the only piece of data. You had the Nostradamus, the so-called Nostradamus, who had forecast accurately the results of every presidential election.
He said
Kamala was going to win,
okay.
and it's now his second time. And he actually, in the Daily Mail today, it said he's given up. He's retired.
2 strikes and you're out.
Yeah, 2 strikes and you're out. And I suppose Nate Silver. Actually, in the end, Nate Silver was not too far off the money. But the surprising thing to me was he won the Trump seems to have won the popular vote. Yeah, which was surprising.
I have 0 question about politics so that's good. That's a good start. We did
Let's
all
talk about something much more interesting.
all of 2.5 minutes of prep call with Sir Martin. So like I know it was going to be free writing for most. Let's take it back to advertising for a minute, right?
Well, actually, the two are related. I mean, the amounts of money spent. Somebody said, $1 billion was spent on one senator's race. I can't remember which one it was. And that used to be when I was at WPP, Blue State Digital raised $1 billion in small contributions for the first Obama campaign, and then I think we did 700 million for the second one because Obama wasn't quite as popular the second time round. It was the first time, but $1 billion was a lot. Now it's 15 billion is what you spend.
Yeah,
so it's
be difficult to grow next year.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's made a hell of a difference to people like Scripps. If you look at their figures, I mean, they showed actually good growth in Q3, but it was totally due, and Fox, totally due to political spending. I mean, if you look at the underlying, it was negative.
Okay. I want to talk about reputation. Advertising doesn't always have the best reputation, right?
We are amongst the least trusted.
I was going to say that,
we're probably a little bit ahead of government officials.
Jeff Bezos published an editorial in the Post saying that he didn't endorse a candidate because press or journalism aren't trusted, almost like as bad as Congress. I think advertising.
I'm not sure
next.
I believe that. I think he didn't do it because he didn't want to incur the ire. I mean,
maybe he had better stats than everyone else.
Are we Chatham House rules? Yeah.
Store your phones away.
At FII in Saudi, in Riyadh, Barry Sternlicht was there, who was a New York real estate developer, so part of the Trump real estate community, and Starwood was the company that he built. And so property and hotels. And I saw him there and know him a little bit. And I said, well, what is it? What does Trump, potentially a Trump victory mean for you? And he said, I will have to hide. And I said, well, you won't be lonely because there'll be a lot of people hiding with you. And he said he went to a wedding, I guess it must have been in the property community in New York, and Trump was there, and Trump refused to speak to him. He knows him well. Refuses to speak to him because he backed Nikki Haley, as he put his money behind Nikki Haley. So it's quite interesting.
There'll be a lot of.
So the reason I go through that story is that Bezos, I'm sure, was worried about retribution.
Yeah. He was saying, back to my question. He was saying, "I'll try hard."
I'll avoid the question. It's a subtle way of avoiding the question.
I know you're going to tell you answer whatever my questions are. That's fine. That's all right. Advertising.
Prepared answers is not to the questions he's going to ask.
So, reputation.
Yeah.
Advertising, Congress, press, journalists. Right. You've been working in this industry for many years. Why do you keep in this industry? The reputation is awful.
It's a bit like knocking your head against a brick wall.
Exactly.
You keep on saying, why do you do it?
Why is it still exciting for you? What do you find
it's
in
one of the few industries, actually, where you see, I mean, it's a bit like investment banking, it's a bit like consulting. I mean, you see lots of industries, so it's the variety. So you see lots of industries, and you see lots of geographies, and you see the impact of technology on it. I mean, there are two buckets, as far as I'm concerned, that determine everything. One is a geographical bucket and the other is a technology bucket. So if I look at, I've done three things really, advertising, Saatchi's, WPP and S4. And Sarches was about globalization. I think it was April or October of 1983, I was reading the Harvard Business Review. How many people in the room know the name Ted Levitt? Professor Levitt means anything. See, there's 1, 2 people. Amazing, right? So this was meat and drink to me. Ted Levitt was a Harvard Business School marketing professor who wrote an article in 1983 on globalization. He's really I'm sure there were people who read about globalization, but he's the father of globalization from my point of view. And he wrote an article which basically said consumers are going to consume everything in the same way everywhere. And that really was the beginning. You know, when I read that article, I was on the 6th floor of Charlotte Street at Sarches. I was the CFO, and Morris and Charles were around the corner, and I rushed around the corner. It wasn't quite, you know, I wasn't in my bath and shouting Eureka, but it was pretty much like that. And I said, this is it, right? And we did not we, but the creative department, Charles, did this famous ad for British Airways called Manhattan Landing, which was New York flying across the Atlantic to the UK. It was rather like a Star Wars type. It wasn't a Ridley Scott. Ridley Scott wasn't David Putnam. I'm trying to remember who the director was. But of its time, in the 80s, this was in the days of Thatcher and Lord King and Colin Marshall, who revitalized British Airways. It was really one of the most famous globalization campaigns. Anyway, so globalization was one thing, and that really, in a world which was growing at 3% plus, no structural inflation, low interest rates, I mean, ultimately even negative interest rates, the world was growing pretty rapidly. And that's the first wave of geography, if you like. And that continued. I started at Sarches in 1977, left in 85, started WPP in 85, left WPP in 2018. So up until the late 90s, globalization really, Thatcher, Reagan, was on fire. It didn't matter where you went, as long as the demographics were in your favor, you know, you did pretty well. And then the internet started to kick in, and smartphones, mobile and smartphones, and then technology started to kick in. So WPP was about the continuation of globalization, and then the impact of technology on advertising, and then really S4 is more about technology, and it's a bit about the geography, but it's really about technology, and the world is a different place. I mean, it's interesting. We're meeting on, you know, Trump is a good example of the fragmentation. The world is not going to grow as fast. It'll go, in my view, at 3 or less than 3. There's more structural inflation than people are used to. You know, so you see central banks started this year thinking they were going to lower interest rates. It actually, getting the inflation down to 2%, which is their target, was more difficult than they thought. And I think there is more structural inflation there. I think it's quite difficult to hold it at those levels. And, you know, Trump will be inflationary. If he slams on tariffs, it'll be even more inflationary. So it'll be a different world. And now technology really becomes very important to improve efficiency. I mean, 2 things are happening now. One is fragmentation. So Trump means that US, going back to what I said about Trump, it's good for the US. Whether it's good for the rest of the world is very... I mean, you've got 3 big problems, US, China, and Trump is not going to be helpful on that score. The Chinese would have preferred Kamala Harris because she's more predictable. You just don't know. And the Chinese are very uncomfortable about that. The Russia, you know, if he does intercede in Ukraine, you know, I think the problem with Russia will be what will they do next, or what will Putin do next? And the third thing, Iran. I mean, I was with somebody just earlier today who suggested that with Trump in the White House, the Israelis would be more prone to try and take out the Iranian nuclear facilities, because Trump would be, at least in the short term, supportive of that or passive about it, whereas Biden would probably not. So those three issues, I think, are going to cause even greater fragmentation, forgetting about North Korea, etc. So I think what you're going to see is the world is going to fragment more, and therefore technology is going to become really important. I didn't mention Europe. I mean, the growth spots now are going to be North and South America, Middle East, and Asia, with a qualifier on China because of the Taiwan risk. So if you're big in China, do you really want to be bigger? Big is defined as 15 to 20% of your sales, because China's 18 trillion out of 106 trillion GDP. So I think the second wave now, or is after the geographical wave, is fragmentation, with markets like Europe, which are going to grow at less than 3%. You know, we have the UK budget, and the OBR says, you know, the UK economy is going to grow 1.8% next year and 1.5% for 2 years thereafter on the current sort of government budget plan. So we're going to grow sub 3% in Europe, and that applies to Germany, which is in a state of turmoil economically. France, the same. Italy and Spain, probably a little bit better. You know, the periphery of Europe, the southern periphery, Greece, Portugal, doing a little bit better, but they're still not growing that rapidly. So AI, blockchain, metaverse, much maligned metaverse, overhyped maybe, but now underhyped in my view. Quantum computing, all these technologies are going to mean that efficiency and economy are going to become more important. So, you know, that's the way I see it. And, you know, AI, which is, you know, the oil for AI, or the renewable energy for AI, is data. That is going to be really important in terms of trying to get greater growth and efficiency and economy in the European economies, and in fact all economies.
How is that going to impact advertising in particular?
Well, it's already impacted it quite significantly. I mean, in our business, there are 5 things that we see, and this may not be a complete list, but in order of impact, the biggest impact so far has been visualization and copywriting. So copywriting and art direction, you know, what took us a day or 2 days or 3 days can take us an hour, 2 hours or 3 hours. That's a two-edged sword, because we charge by time. And if you know, less time, client procurement department say it costs less. So whether the people in the agency industry like it or not, there will be fewer of them in those areas, right? Because they'll be more productive, and they've got technology. So we've invested in, you know, you mentioned we were invested, so we've set up this sidecar fund. We only raised $100 million, and we've only invested about 30, in yourselves and
Not
others,
enough.
and others, and we've taken quite a cautious approach. But you know, we invested in you. We've invested. Latest investment is Runway. Runway is a text-to-video platform, valued, I think it was in the last round, at $3 billion. Interestingly, NVIDIA Corp Dev is an investor, so it's not NVIDIA venture funds. One of the reasons it caught my eye was NVIDIA Corp Dev is invested in it. Minimax is the Chinese equivalent of it, which is text-to-video and text-to-audio. So that's in that first area of visualization and copywriting. The second area is personalization at scale, and this is huge. I mean, this is the work we're doing with General Motors, which we started in July. General Motors have completely upended their marketing model. They now have 4 brands: Buick, GMC, Chevrolet, and Cadillac. They did have IPG and Publicis as the 2 agencies handling 2 of the 4 brands each. They got rid of them, and they have 4 upper funnel creative agencies: Anomaly, 72 and Sunny, Preacher, and Mother, who are doing the strategic big ideas. And we're the foundational agency responsible for creating, producing, and distributing content at scale, not actually just for digital, but for traditional. But GM is the 11th largest advertiser in America and the 19th globally. So you can see that it's more of a US business. We're quite focused around US, which makes it a little bit easier. But they've completely upended their model at a time when they're doing pretty well. They made $3 billion in the first quarter, $4 billion in the second, have had a strong third quarter. Of the Western car manufacturers, who are obviously having to compete against the EVs, not just Tesla, but the Chinese EVs, they're probably in the best position and most successful. Most of the other manufacturers have got, BMW this morning, who we also work with, Mercedes, VW, BW talking about closing plants, all facing great challenges. But the personalization at scale, which is what I call Netflix on steroids, that's using data from the platforms, the signals from the platforms and the first-party data, that's the second area. That's huge. And every CMO that we talk to, CIO, we spoke to the CIO, COO of a major financial services company yesterday, a packaged goods company yesterday, big one, global, all fascinated by the personalization at scale. That's the second area. The third area is media planning and buying. Group M, which I was responsible in part for building by taking originally the media departments of Ogilvy and Thompson and putting them together in the late 90s. And then we added, Y&R's media department, and then we added Gray's Media and a number of other agencies, and created the largest, still is the largest, media planner and buyer. It does about $60 billion of volume. That organization now employs about 35,000 people in 3 networks: Mindshare, Wavemaker, and Essence Mediacom. And each network has about 10,000, 15,000 people in. There is no way that there's going to be 10 or 15,000 people in 3 years' time. So the advertising revenues of all clients this year, the advertising investment of all clients this year will be about $1 trillion. So it makes the maths much easier. Maths are quite easy to think about. And so of that $1 trillion, and this excludes mainland China, of that $1 trillion, 700 billion is digital and 300 billion is traditional. The 700 billion digital is growing at, after Q3, about 15%, the 6 major platforms. And the traditional is declining by anywhere between 0 and 10%, depending on whether you have live sports. Your live sports, like a Disney or
an
a
election
Fox.
year.
But strip out the election year because it creates some artificiality in a way. With live sports, 0 to 5% down. Without live sports, you're down 10%. So Warner Brothers Discovery will be that. And the maths are really interesting to me. I mean, I find it really fascinating, and nobody focuses on this stuff. So of that $1 trillion, Google now is the biggest media buyer. It's $250 billion this year, probably, maybe a little bit more. Meta is 150, and Amazon is 60. And I said a few years ago that Amazon was going to get to 100 billion. Everybody thought I was a lunatic. They will get to 100 billion. But you take those 3, so that's 460. And then you have Alibaba, Tencent. We don't have great data on them, and then mainland China. And then we have ByteDance. And we know that the TikTok outside China this year is 40 billion. Okay? So you've got 460 plus the 40. That's 500 billion in those 4 platforms. 3 Western plus TikTok. Or TikTok Western part. ByteDance, by the way, is 150 billion, including the 40 outside China. Yep. So it's 110 in China. So ByteDance on its own, including mainland China, is as big as Meta. Yeah. So you've got 25 and 15. The maths are very easy. So think about that share. And all the agencies say that life has got complicated. It hasn't got complicated. It's really simple, right? It's those 6 platforms, plus Microsoft is at 19 billion now. And obviously growing because of its investments in Sam Altman, in OpenAI, in Mistral, in G42, and Activision Blizzard in gaming. So that they'll grow, but they're 19 billion. And then you've got Apple at 11, not a disclosed figure, but we're guessing it's 11. And then you drop down to Snap at 5.5, Pinterest at 4, Twitter was 5 before Musk. Now Musk, it's probably about 1.5, 2. Whether his liaison with Trump will mean it will grow or diminish even further, we don't know. Walmart's 3 billion. So we don't know what Netflix is running at, but I would guess it's not more than a billion as such, but it'll grow. But it shows you that the concentration is huge. And these companies, the ones that I've mentioned, so the ones that are really going to win, in my view, are the 6 platforms. The 3 Western, 3 Eastern. And one other point, President Xi, if you remember, after Jack Ma made that boo-boo around financial with the regulator, the Chinese said, we'll break you up into 8 pieces, I think it was, or 9 pieces. I was in Shanghai just recently, and the guy who's the CMO of Alibaba used to work with me at WPP, Chris Tung. And he said that they have not broken Alibaba up yet. So it's been a couple of years. And I think the Chinese have figured out that having big tech companies from a defensive and offensive, you see it in Ukraine, you see it in the Middle East, big tech companies, you see it with Starlink and Musk. Yep. Big companies are really important. So those 6, plus Apple, plus Microsoft, plus NVIDIA, plus Musk, because you can't rule him out in any sense, and he's got this software loop of Starlink and Tesla, etc. They'll all be players, plus the 3 software companies, so Oracle, Adobe, and Salesforce. I would say those are the key players. Now, some of those companies, Apple is what, to now 3.4 trillion, despite Buffett's sales of stock. And they are, 3.4 trillion is as big as Germany, about the same. If you equate market cap to GDP. My point is these companies are countries, okay? And I think there will be a $4 trillion company, and there'll be probably a $10 trillion company. NVIDIA, I think, has surpassed, I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, it surpassed
most valuable.
Apple. Yeah, Apple. So it's about 3.5 trillion, whatever. So these are real companies. And it'll come back to one of the other questions that we talked about in the prep, which is about regulation. But the point is, with AI, what do you need? You need capital for compute, and you need capital for energy. I was in Saudi. I've been in Saudi for the last couple of weeks around FII and then the Creative Festival yesterday, Athar. And what's interesting is Saudi are going to build, just like with G42 in the UAE, it's really building a third force. So you've got US, you've got China, who are the 2 lead forces in AI. They will be the third force, or they in their minds. And of course, what do they have? They have Saudi Aramco, right? Which is another $3 trillion. It's a bit less now, a company. It did hit 3 trillion. So they have a huge energy company which can provide resource. So that's the way I think the map plays out. And there will be new companies coming to the fore, but those companies are going to be the dominant forces, and I don't see them being displaced.
I'm going to try to keep us on track here.
My intention is to keep you off track.
It's an impossible task. Last question, because I think I'm getting signs. So you've mentioned that you've invested in companies like ID5, small companies in the context of the giants we're talking about. Why and what do you expect, and how do you see this kind of innovation flow?
So we have about 7,500 people in 34, 35 countries. And if there's one thing we're good at, we've got very good tech people who are super good at understanding. Usually agencies talk about tech a lot, but they're not much good at it. And the NVIDIA people I know said to us, not only do you include your code programs on the back end of your presentation, but they work. They said that most of the agencies they deal with, either they don't include them, or if they do include them, they don't work. And I was impressed by that. And then I was impressed by the fact with the Unreal Engine, with Epic Games, we developed utilization of it. We set up our Unreal Engine studio in New Delhi. And I thought our people were really good at that. So I thought to myself, well, look, they're so good at it. We've really got 7,500 practitioners around the world. They will know what the best technology is to use. So we're not just a financial investor, we're a strategic investor. I mean, the theory is that we provide practical know-how on application, and of course then can develop client relationships, better understanding, better utilization. So our people are pretty good at that, actually, and pretty good at picking, and we hope with ID5 we've done the same, and we're sure they did the same. So really, it was really putting our money where our mouth is, and if we thought a technology was good, deploying it.
All right. I think that's a good way to end.
Good.
Thank you very much for joining us. All right, and now for the last part, the last session of today. So we talked a bit about Google. We talked about some of their challenges around rolling out the privacy sandbox. There are bigger challenges. I think the real thing they care about is really privacy, is regulation and antitrust issues. And we have a first-party advocate or a first-party witness of some of those issues in the US. We have some people who've been close to the topic and kind of legal issues that Google has had in Europe. So I'm very happy to introduce the next panel, which is going to discuss what will the world look like after Google's dominant position in digital advertising. So we'll do a bit of science fiction. I'm sure it'll be lively and opinionated, given the panelists we have. So please, welcome our panel.
Well, I'm going to sit down. It's been a long day, long night. Hello, everyone. My name's Anna Milicevic. I'll be your host today. We're the last panel of today, so we're standing between you and drinks.
Yeah.
Always a good spot.
Always that. That's always tried out as the last
That's
point.
Karen's signature panel. But yeah, I love this panel because I don't think many of us need any introduction. But please, gentlemen, introduce yourselves with one-liners. Ari, over to you.
I'm spending my retirement as a journalist.
People think I'm a journalist, but I never was a journalist.
AI and contrarian, I suppose.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Well, anybody with drinks here? Because that might help the situation. So a few panels have talked about our topic today already. Ari, you have some first-hand experience with going down to Virginia, a wonderful state where the Google DOJ trial is happening. Care to tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, sure. I may not be able to talk. I'm having a bit of an asthma problem. So I'll try. So I decided to go down to Virginia to cover the ad tech trial in person. It was not being broadcast in any way. You had to show up. No electronics all day, no phone, not even anywhere to store it. So you have to leave your stuff back in your car or your hotel and take the notes longhand. It's my Super Bowl. Man, how was I going to miss that? And it was great. It was a very great experience. I like at least half of the witnesses were on my personal Christmas list, and I saw them squirm and try not to say the things they really wanted to say, and it was deeply entertaining.
I was amazed you weren't on the witness list because I cherish your drawing of the Google ecosystem.
You know why I wasn't on the witness list? I didn't do anything wrong.
So the trial, several trials, but the most recent trial, and obviously regulatory activity by the DOJ, some regulatory activity on the CMA side here, and other jurisdictions are trying to wrap their heads around regulation. We just heard Sir Martin talk about the concentration that we're seeing, not just in the US market, but globally. What is the argument for the open internet in light of this? Karen, maybe you can take that one first.
Wow.
Easy question.
Yeah, it's it's a hard one to answer in a snappy one-liner.
You can talk about politics or economics or.
Well, I'll go on to Trump in a bit, but like, we all have to talk about Trump to get out of our fucking systems. Look, the open internet is challenged at the minute. That's the long and short of it. Sir Martin, or as I like to call him, Sir Marty. He doesn't like me call him that. But the last time we spoke, I spoke to him on stage. I called him Sir Marty. He told me not to call him that. So Sir Martin, sorry. He's alluded to the fact that these platforms gobble up quite a lot of spend, and we are basically living on scraps. And Google have complicated the problem over the last sort of 2 decades, I think. Decade and a half. First getting their hands on DoubleClick, and then basically extending their search monopoly into display. And now we're in a situation where they are the masters of the universe, and they can do whatever they want. And it's pretty depressing, to be honest with you, because even though there's a trial to kind of break them up, and I've been kind of an advocate, as Rob will attest to, about breaking them up and championing the idea of breaking them up for the better part of a decade, it feels that they're in the driving seat in terms of what happens next, right? So even if they deprecate cookies, which they are going to do,
I would say they effectively have, just not officially.
Yeah,
yes.
It still benefits them, right? Look at the recent earnings report. The network's business is declining and has been declining for 8 consecutive quarters, and YouTube is flying. Search is flying. Like, it's a bit like the Saw movie. You know what I mean? You get out of one situation, you saw your hand off, and the fucker's got you in another trap halfway down. So it's kind of like, I feel like it's kind of like a never-ending nightmare with Google. It's maybe I'm a bit depressed about today. It's just the weather is crap in London today. The politics is crap. So yeah, I'm pretty down on the whole thing. As for the open internet, yeah, who knows? Maybe a couple of websites, depending on what Jeff Green thinks we should do.
Very cheerful. Rob?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, as Kieran was saying, I think he has been about 6 lobsters so far, because every year we have a bet that Google will get broken up next year, and so far it hasn't happened. But it's important, though, right? Because the open web is where most of the content lives. It's where most of our publishing lives. It's where most of our journalism lives. And it's fairly depressing that Samarti's 6 companies, they're not really, for the most part, guardians of quality journalism. And I think where we're at is there's a kind of a future heaven and a future hell, right? I mean, my own personal bet noir is PMax. It's, hey, Google, please spend all my money on bad ads, right? I mean, and they'll literally auto-create bad ads for you if they don't exist. Could be for the benefit of the advertiser. I think it's to make Google money, personally, but maybe I'm too cynical. And a bad future is, how many thousands of advertisers now only spend money with Alphabet and Meta? And then a whole load more will, as somebody said, do 6 more. But that doesn't really help us fund the institutions that kind of make up our democracy. So I really hope that, be it through regulation, be it through change through AI, be it through something, we have some way of readdressing the balance. And before I kind of hand back so I could speak for this for about an hour, for me the trick is all around measurement. What's not been discussed by the DOJ, what's not in any of the regulator areas. I mean, the CMA taking on Google is like taking a spoon to a gunfight. I mean, it's not going to work.
I'd agree, because as Sir Martin was just talking about how there are certain companies that are being we're trying to regulate them, and they're the size of countries. So you can regulate a country as much as you can regulate one of these companies, and I think that's.
I want to jump in a couple thoughts. First, Sir Martin left Comcast off the list, much bigger than Walmart, certainly, and a global company. So I don't think we should
Is that a company you're personally familiar with?
No, it's actually not. I was there a year, have no idea about anything in the company, but I've heard that it's big. Some people could get to go to the Olympics, not me. But I'll just make a point.
No bitterness there at all.
No, not bitter. I'm just telling the truth. The second point I'll make is I heard someone, I think it was at the Google trial, but it wasn't really relevant to the case. One of the agency people remarked, the open web is really expensive. And I thought that was super interesting, because I always think of the open web and programmatic as cheap, $1, $2 CPMs. He was talking in terms of performance. when he stack ranks all of his performance options. Open web, most expensive option, which gets you thinking a little bit about some of the problems we probably should solve with or without Google. And last thing, I recently spoke to Richard Cacapolo, I think he's now the president of Daily Mail. I don't remember his title exactly. And I asked him what he wanted to happen out of the trial, what was the outcome he wanted. And he said something really interesting. He said, there's going to be money. There's going to be a multi-billion-dollar settlement. There's going to be a spin-out. Great. But what he really wants is to win the peace. He wants the end result to be the stable world of journalism, and maybe that's the multi-billion-dollar settlement that goes into that, and maybe it's maybe it's the spin-out company acts in a different way, and he also said, like, I can't imagine that journalism in the open web survives without Google's help in some way. And I thought those were all really interesting points.
Rob, I don't think you like that answer.
No, I mean, I don't think Google deserves the trust for the journalism, right? We've had 20 years of seeing how Google treats open journalism, and yeah, we've seen from Ari's amazing commentary on the case how Google will, push its own rankings or push its own products or change the bids for its own benefit. So I don't think Google has the right of the trust to be the guardian of the open web. For me, the only trick is to kind of force Google to divest, to share some of its data advantage. Because right now, most measurement systems are based on Google systems, be Google Analytics or DB360 or whatever it might be. And actually, the thing with Privacy Sandbox, the reason for the delay, in my view, was they were getting enhanced conversions, their conversion API built out. They have no plan to use Privacy Sandbox to measure things. They're going to take CRM data direct from source. And they and Meta have a huge advantage on that. Almost every sale that happens now, record gets sent straight to those people. The only way for the open web to survive on direct response, at least, is if that data is appropriately shared with a wider group.
So if Google doesn't deserve that trust, who and what kind of ecosystem does? Karen, is there an innovation angle here that is perhaps positive?
Okay, I've lightened up a wee bit now. I'm a bit more optimistic. I think it's too simplistic to say that everything's lost, the open web is lost, etc., etc. There's a lot of trends happening in the space that could change the sort of balance of power. I think Ari's alluded to it very well about measurement. We need to fix that first, right, to make the open web more competitive with a Google and Meta, right? At the end of the day, those companies are measuring their own homework, right? They're telling us the outcomes, but they're not. There's no independent play there, right? It's just like PMax sort of basically optimizes against a load of garbage inventory, and then Google tell you get a load of clicks, right? But that could be absolute crap. You don't know for sure, right? I think there's stuff like curation. I know curation's got a bit of a batter in here today, but I think that there's ways that agencies, particularly agencies, because they need to spend money outside of the walled gardens. Let's be honest here, right? If you spend money just on Google and Meta, you're absolutely useless to a brand, right? Because a brand could in-house that, use AI, and just do it themselves. Why the hell do you need an agency for? Agencies now are incentivized to find other pockets of inventory, pockets of audience outside that. And I think curation is a way to do that. And I think the publishers have a good point that it needs to improve, right? It needs to be a conversation about yield, not cheap inventory, right? The other thing that's interesting, and I think it doesn't get enough sort of coverage, is there are businesses being flipped on now, like Uber and PayPal, who are just entering into the space around retail media, right? And they're not just the big players, right? There's a lot of smaller apps, smaller retailer sites that are bringing endemic advertising into the space that's never been there before, right? And that's performance-led. Now, they're doing it audience extension, which means there's more money going into programmatic, and you'll hear loads of people talking about retail data next year, which is basically just audience extension, right? But effectively, that's money that's going into the system, right? New money, right? That won't all go to Meta and Google, right? I think that Google's a bit like Trump, right? He's now the president of the United States. We may hate him, we may dislike him. He's a convicted felon. He's got no style, no intelligence. He's got no political philosophy. He's an orange-hued orangutan, right? Effectively, that's what he is.
And these are just the compliments.
Right. But you have to deal with him, right? You can't ignore him. He's the president of the United States. You have to do business with him. Google's a bit like Trump, right? You have to do business with them, regardless of what happens. They're going to be part of the ecosystem. But are they going to be the saviors of the open web? No. They're just part. I think Ari's right. They're going to be part of that solution. Whether it's a spin out, whether they keep hold of the business, they're still going to be part of that. I would prefer if they spun out the business and just stuck the demand into the ecosystem. That would be my preference. Just give us your demand and go away.
So I've written about this, but I think we need to be a little careful what we ask for, because use the word give us their demand. They're not going to give it. They're going to buy it at the lowest possible price.
Open it up.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, they're going to open it up.
Plug it in.
But let's look at the details there. So currently, Google Ads demand pretty much only goes to AdX, and they take a very low fee on that. So they take a 32% fee, but only 13% of it is on the ad side. So AdX takes its 32 total, right? That's not normal operating procedure for Google Ads. Google Ads usually takes 32 itself. So the day they open it up, they take 32, and all the bids go down across all. Now it's open. You could buy. Google Ads goes to PubMatic, Google Ads goes to Magnite, but the prices are all lower. And then the SSPs need to start lowering the rates to be competitive.
Oh, well, that's another day's crack.
And there's a lot of secondary effects of Google Ads opening up its demand that some people are not going to find very pleasant.
There's a practical consideration too related to the actual DOJ case, and that's that the legal time frame here moves glacially compared to the ad tech time frame, which is milliseconds, nanoseconds, and things like that. So something like this may take years, if not decades, to untangle. So what does that create in the meantime for ad tech as an environment? And is there something short of a magical they'll open it up solution? What can we proactively do in the meantime to, deal with the garbage man, basically?
I think we need to sort of try and react to change. One of the great things about the position with Google is they're not going to get spun out anytime soon, I don't think. But it does mean
when you say anytime soon, do you mean like 2030?
2030.
Okay.
I mean, if they may do
I don't
so.
know.
Well, look, if you want to have a double up on the stake bets, I'm all in.
Is anybody counting how many lobsters Rob has racked up since we started?
I mean, I've been getting this for 10 years, so I've never actually...
You've got 2030.
I think with Trump winning, the America Act goes right through the Congress, and they get broken up by legislation, not by judicial.
Okay. What's the America Act?
It's the new name for the bipartisan bill to break up Google. It's gone through twice. It's got bipartisan support, and I think it goes off like a rocket next year.
Well, how about a stake in Lugers this time next year, right? I mean, look, for me, the only way they spin out is if they choose to do so voluntarily. Rumour has it they offered the EU they were going to spin out AdX, and the EU said that's not enough. You've got to think the last DOJ case was mostly around a search monopoly, so it's not clear to me how spinning out AdX has anything to do with a search monopoly. Scott Galloway was saying that they might spin out YouTube. That's just not going to happen.
He's an idiot.
Right.
I agree. I actually agree
he's
with that.
really a dumb guy.
Yeah, he's on the board of Open Water. Or
His big ad tech investment is the most bizarre. Is Open Web here? Anyone?
Yeah.
Anyone? Most bizarre, likely corrupt company in the world.
So the solution, I think, is for everyone to kind of lean into the alternatives. One of the great things is that Google used to produce amazing product. Back when Ari used to work there, they used to produce amazing product.
Yeah, but they bought most of the companies.
But right now, actually, their product is getting an awful lot worse. Privacy Sandbox was an absolute disaster of a product. Whether it's deliberately a disaster or not, we can also debate. But actually, try and use Google Paid Search right now. Above the fold, it's all ads. That's not a great product. And actually, what we've got to think is like, how can Perplexity or OpenAI Search help kind of compete? The world's moving at a huge pace right now, and for me, the trick for publishers is to try and move faster than the bear. The bear's chasing them into extinction, and we need to move faster by leading into these new areas to try and adapt faster than the giants can.
Just a clarification. So there's two federal antitrust cases, Search and AdTech. Search, they were declared a monopoly, and the remedies start in March as a separate trial for remedies. And AdTech will be concluded at the end of this year, and then remedies will start probably at the same time around March. So we'll have a lot of activity on this whole subject in the first half of next year.
I mean, the consequences though for publishers could be fairly extreme. Like, so let's just say they spin it out and then Google starts charging for ad serving. I mean, they give ad server away effectively so they can make money on AdX. That's how they kind of made their margin. So does that mean the publishers are going to have to pay more money for the ad tech stack, which means less of take rate?
But in this scenario that you're describing, isn't the ad server now separate from the demand? And at least in theory, they could choose a different ad server. And
Well, how many ad servers are there? SAS and Ubiquity and OpenX have kind of abandoned the ad server business for their SSP. So
there's Adform, there's
Kevel and Adform.
well,
Yeah.
Kevel,
Smart.
yeah, but Kevel's more of a custom play for retail media, and it's a great company. I love Kevel, by the way. I'm a huge fan.
We could debate what's an ad network or what's an ad server, but technically that's an ad server. So
I love ad networks.
A vacuum also creates opportunity. There'll be a new ad server. Look, it will be a pain. There'll be a huge amount of pain to have to reinstall GAM. But equally, GAM is where all the issues lie anyway, right? They already admitted that part of the plan for GAM was to disrupt header bidding. And actually, the major bid now isn't the RTB bid. It's the bid that happens in the header. So actually, it wouldn't take. It'll be a real shift, but it wouldn't take much to alter the systems to have header bidding go around Google. And if you do that, you create opportunity for value. The trick really is, how do we create a product that people want to buy? Yeah, the other thing about Google and Meta is they have huge pressure on CEOs and CFOs where they show these reports that go, here's $1 zillion you can make next year if you spend more. We need to help the open web create that same level of need and demand if we're going to try and fix this.
Yeah, I think there's also some possibility that either Amazon or Meta gets more serious about open web if there are remedies. In the documents that Meta showed about FAN, Facebook Audience Network, their biggest concern about FAN by far was disintermediation. They realized that to get to open web, you had to go through Google no matter what you did. And they eventually did the deal with them, but they were never very comfortable with it. If you imagine a world where Google, it's split up, there's an independent ad server that fully supports header bidding without conflicts of interest. You could imagine FAN getting restarted. You could also imagine Amazon building an ad server from scratch because they would be able to get the demand from Google Ads potentially.
So this is starting to sound like the environment we had about 10-ish years ago before mobile became a thing. Is that what we're returning to and kind of reworking the system from there?
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, we're talking about ad networks, we're talking about ad servers being in play, we're talking about opening up demand, and we're talking about restarting FAN. So that sounds like...
It could open up a whole wave of innovation for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Ari's talking about new demand sources coming in, but like we could see ad tech businesses reinvent the ad server and to be a little bit more publisher friendly, if you will, less about Google's quarterly earnings and more about the publisher. Look, I think next year this will be a big discussion, but I think next year I think the big topic next year will be around take rates. I think curation for me is open the fissure on how much take rate a DSP and SSP take in the value chain. I think it's unsustainable right now. It's 40, 50p for every pound, and it's just getting to the point. This is where the likes of curation has arrived. It's not a technology piece; it's an economic piece. I don't know how this plays into, but it's been on my mind for the last couple of weeks, so I'm going to want to sort of air it in public. But I think you're going to see a lot of debate about this next year. There is an unbelievable amount of back channel stuff going on between DSPs and SPs around curation. I know it's not related to Google, but Google just launched a curation product, but it's sort of loosely attached to it. But I am looking forward to this. This has been coming for fucking years, but I'm looking forward to next year.
Kieran, have you just invested in a curation platform by any chance?
No.
Deals with take rates?
Yeah, well, yeah, but maybe. But that's inconsequential, this conversation.
I think curation is the second effect of OpenPath, right? Because basically OpenPath was the shot across the bow that said we can't reduce the take rates anymore on our own, so we're just going to gobble up the sell side's take rates, right? And so if both sides are taking 15, and now you're taking 15 plus 5 for your OpenPath, you've now saved 10%, right? Curation is the opposite. Curation is the publisher side saying, well, your DSP is dumb. You shouldn't do any bidding in it. You should really just get really good supply, and maybe at some point we'll offer you a DSP-like product so you could get off that nasty, expensive trade desk thing.
DSP Lite or
DSP Lite.
programmable DSPers.
Yeah, but instead of paying 30 or whatever the DSP's charging, because we don't know how much they're charging,
But
you have a clear price that the agency have on the paper agreement with the client, and you have some kind of transparency, but you're actually probably paying less using sell-side curation.
Does this hinge in any way, though, on the Google DOJ conversation, or is this completely separate?
No, well, Google's just launched a curation product, so it's kind of related to
yeah,
it. Like,
but so has everybody else. I mean, it's
Yeah,
it's the new ad network.
Bringing it back, I don't think take rates are going to be the issues next year. Sorry, Kieran.
it will be. I'm telling you, Rob. I'm telling you, it's going to be big. Like all these publishers are sitting in the front row, right?
Right.
Like they're getting screwed on the supply chain. Let's be honest. It's a subject that's been bubbling.
How are they getting screwed? They're making more money.
They're not making more
They're
money.
making
Talk
more
to this
money.
man here, George, and he'll tell you all about it.
How can they not make more money?
What might be a solution, though, is to help. What we need to do is, if all we do is deal with take rates, all we do is have an ever smaller pool with ever smaller margins for ad tech. What we've got to do is grow the pool faster. The way to do that is through measurement. What we need to do is somehow make it so that the Google doesn't have a huge advantage in measurement. Because if you can prove the value of the Guardian or any press site towards what they're delivering and show that value holistically, then the dollars will start to flow back towards it. So the focus has to be, how do we show the value of the open web, and how do we build a better product? Part of that also is to remove some of the crap that goes into the open web. The reason I like curation is because it gives people a chance to take responsibility and go, right, in this piece of curation that I've done, I guarantee it's only high quality stuff, no garbage. And if I get it wrong, I'm in the dock. That's the way we improve the product and improve more dollars back in, not trying to sort of race to the bottom on margin.
Yeah, I think logically it makes more sense to append valuable data at the sell side than putting it on the burden on the trader to figure out what combination of segments and third-party data, et cetera. It's a cleaner approach if everything else was equal. Now, it may not all be equal, but it makes sense logically that that's how quality type signals would be integrated.
I've completely derailed this panel. Sorry about that.
It's been that kind of day, and I think we some of our topic was covered earlier as well, so we're in a good spot there. Does the CMA have any legs here? I was leaning no very heavily earlier.
They need a bigger spoon for this gunfight, right? I mean, I heard one plan from the CMA was to try and get Apple to bring cookies back. And you think, well, what planet is that on? The greatest trick Google pulled, I think, was convincing the CMA to tell Google to keep cookies and keep making more money. So, no.
Officially sanctioned for keeping cookies, yeah.
2 years ago, when Elon first was buying Twitter, I got a phone call from a senior executive at Twitter who said, Tim Cook is going to cause fascism in the United States. And I was like, what? Who is this? And he's...
how he answers that.
And that's pretty much it. And the logic was that Apple's ATT broke Twitter's ability to do direct response. They missed a couple of quarters. Elon swoops in, turns it into a fascist machine. Now we have Trump. So, holds up.
I don't think X is responsible for Mr. Trump getting elected. It's the lad in Ohio or Illinois who's annoyed about the Democrats that got him elected. Let's be honest, Although I do like that thinking, though, that it was X and the fascism machine.
It's nice to have someone to point the finger at, and I think that's somewhat comforting. One thing before we let you catch your breath a little bit, one thing I always think of when we talk about any sort of regulatory activity in this space, what we want to do in ad tech is, to the consumer, the product's not that bad. When you look at Google, when you look at any of the other large tech companies that have a consumer product that Sir Martin was mentioning, it's not that bad is the best I can do as a tagline. Rob, you were mentioning earlier how it's kind of, crud because there's so many ads and whatnot. But, we get Google Maps for free and all of this other stuff, and this has become a fact of life. So from a consumer perspective, do consumers care about the DOJ trial, about dismantling Google? How do we have a case for the consumer here?
I think obviously the consumer does not care about the DOJ trial, and it does not care about the minutiae of header bidding or RTB or any of that stuff. I think what the consumer does care about probably is the pop-up button going away. I mean, yeah, the whole consent, the whole consent framework being a bit of a mess, if you ask me. But also, I think the consumer does care about quality. And if we're not careful here, particularly with again, things could go well. We can use AI to build out craft, but if we're not careful, if Google owns AI and owns marketing, we're just going to have a whole commoditized layer of low quality advertising, and that's not great for the consumer.
I wanted to build on Rob's talk about measurement as being very important. Obviously, with fragmented media and loss of signal, it becomes harder to measure things. And I think that there's a lot of innovation going on there. The next generation of media mix modeling or whatever it is, and other things like that are really important. And I think one good thing that could come out of the Chrome situation is that if you don't get rid of cookies but make it opt-in or something, and you still have like 5 or 10% of the population keep the cookies on, it makes all the modeling so much better because there's a signal that will be consistent around the world, hopefully. And so that's one thing to look out for. The other thing is, obviously solutions like ID5, give them a little plug here, are very important because I think the sandbox, if you think sandbox targeting Poppy is going to be important, it's really exclusively designed for retargeting. You just can't use it for audience. It doesn't work that way. Third-party audiences are really hard to make work, and combine. You can't do Boolean. You can't do anything. So all that kind of brand response stuff doesn't work in Sandbox at all. And I think we don't talk about that because the folks that Google trots out with their studies, the next roles of the world, nothing wrong with that, they're retargeting companies. So yeah, they got 80% of the results because they're doing retargeting. It's the only thing that Poppy was built for. I've yet to hear like someone from GM say we could reach the the auto intender under 35 female audience. That's not possible in Poppy and that's why they're not saying that.
But that's hardly a problem if you can also advertise on Facebook or another, right? We're not going to go into that. Okay.
Yeah.
So what's our best case scenario for the DOJ actions?
I mean, I can agree with Rob to a point. They'll drag it through the courts, and then get to the point where the DOJ don't really care anymore because of for whatever reason the market's moved on. Or to Ari's point, the God Bless America Act might actually be useful in breaking up Google's business.
It's like an acronym too. I don't know what it stands for.
I like it. I like it.
It's like spells out something.
Yeah. That's the good thing about Trump. He really does hate Google as much as Biden does.
He really does. And Vance does too.
The more lies like we can put into the system that it's a liberal company, it's good for the industry. Like I think we should propagate that. Like we are in the second age of Trump, so lies have currency. So I think we keep pushing that. It's biased against conservative views.
On the best case, I don't know what the best for whom in what context. In the ad tech case, a spin out, it's just pretty straightforward. It's a very easy remedy, and it makes sense. Spin out plus a $10 billion fine. Call it a day. On the surge case, the remedies are much more interesting and could be much more impactful. They're talking about spinning out Chrome, spinning out Safari, not Safari, Android, and then search interoperability. Imagine if you didn't have to buy your search ads from Google Ads. You could buy search ads on Google.com through Bing. That would be a real game changer. That would change pricing. It would change what was available, and that's a real possibility.
So I think that's another argument for opening up the entire ecosystem. Rob, wrap us up.
Yeah, well, I think interoperability is actually the best case, right? I mean, wasn't it, how many years ago was it that you were meant to be able to buy YouTube through a different DSP, and that's still not happened? And I think if we had interoperability on targeting, but also, as I said, on measurement, if we actually opened up that data, and really, what I can hope is that at least now it's out there, right? The case that Google are monopolistic is no longer deniable, right? So what I really hope is that then actions start to flow, and we can try and then also look to protect the valuable part of our ecosystem, which is our content creators and journalism.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to wrap us up on that. Thank you, Rob, Kieran, and Ari. Rob, you've earned, I think, 10 dinners by now.
At least.
Yes.
I didn't agree to the terms.
There was a box at the start of this.
You didn't click the box, no.
Yeah, you ticked it. So I'm going to turn it over back to Matthew, and thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I love that we're ending up on an optimistic note, despite some of the doom and gloom that we had at the beginning. It's oxygenating the industry, right? That's what we're looking for with the hopeful potential future breakdown of the Google empire. All right, this is the end of our event. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. It was a great conversation. Thank you to our moderators, Joanna, Anna, Davide, for keeping us on track and making sense of those discussions and some of the panelists. Thank you to my amazing crew, Valbona, Joe, and Matilda, who are somewhere around here, over there. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for coming. We can continue the discussion in the foyer. There are drinks and nibbles. And we hope to see you next year for ID5 on the Road 2025. Thank you very much.